to our safeguarding training. We plan to finish no later than 2:30. So we're going to be moving fairly swiftly. We'll take a couple of breaks as we go through. If you have any questions that you want to raise as we go through, please either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll deal with them as we go along. Okay, we're going to jump straight in, say a word of prayer, and then we will get down to business. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for your love and for your grace. We thank you for allowing us this time to come together to engage in this training. We're dealing with issues that we would rather not have to deal with, but this is the reality of the world we live in. And we pray, dear Lord, that as we go through, that you will give us the knowledge that we need, that you will equip us so that we can be effective in creating safe environments for our children and for our adults who are at risk of harm. So be with us now as we spend this time together. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so right. Let's begin with Proverbs 31 and verse 8. And this is God's heart for the vulnerable. Proverbs 31:8 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute." So we have a biblical mandate for safeguarding. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has an excellent statement on protection, and I'll just read that. It says, "The Seventh-day Adventists affirm the dignity and worth of each human being and decry all forms of abuse. We recognize the problem of abuse is serious with long-term effects, so Christians must respond to abuse within our church and community. To remain indifferent and unresponsive is to condone and perpetuate abusive behavior. We cooperate with professional services to listen and care for those suffering from abuse and speak out in defense of victims, helping all identify and access professional services and providing a ministry of reconciliation where attitudes and behavior allow." I love this statement because it is a nice, succinct summary of our position on safeguarding. It highlights that we have a responsibility to provide a safe environment, but it also highlights the fact that we need to be cooperative. We need to work along with agencies, professional services who have the means and the resources that we might not. One of the problems historically that we have had with safeguarding is that we have been too insular. We've tried to deal with issues that we're not equipped to deal with. And so I like this statement because it is a very comprehensive kind of statement of our ethos. So our safeguarding policy, which has been updated very recently, was voted through the British Union Conference Executive Committee in March. So it's hot off the press. And as I stated in the chat, if you don't have access to it, you can download it from the British Union Conference website. That policy is designed to keep pace with what government legislation says. And so it is a dynamic document that always needs to be updated so that we stay conversant with present best practice. So our policy seeks to reduce the instances of abuse and a duty of care and or safety failures by providing procedures for best practice in safeguarding. So we make the point there that we are seeking to reduce the instances. We wish that we could stop abuse completely, but that's an impossibility in the world that we live in. But we can do as much as we can to reduce instances of abuse. So safeguarding, in Scotland, I think that the term is child protection. Those terms will be used interchangeably. Child protection covers the specific actions we take to protect children and adults at risk of abuse. Now, I've done my best to make sure that everything that we're covering in this training is in line with Scottish legislation. But if there are issues that or matters that refer to either England or Wales, the main thing is to take the principles that are being outlined. But we will try as much as possible to make sure that we are specific to Scottish legislation. So what is abuse? Well, abuse is the violation of an individual's human and civil rights by another person or persons through the misuse of power and control. That's the key element when we're dealing with abuse, whether it's child abuse, whether it's abuse of an adult at risk of harm, whether it's domestic abuse. The issue is about power and control. Somebody who has power and misuses that power in order to harm another individual. Child protection, and what it is referred to from a legal standpoint, it's protection of minors, that's individuals under the age of 18, from harm. It's preventing damage to their health and development, and ensuring they are surrounded by safe and effective care. So let's unpack what the concept of harm is, because harm can be a very broad term, but it has a legal definition. So when we talk about harm, we're referring to either physical harm, psychological harm causing fear, alarm, or distress, behavior which adversely affects property rights or interests, for example, theft, fraud, embezzlement, or extortion. And obviously that's more pertaining to adults at risk of harm, self-harm, and also neglect. Now, in terms of the history of abuse, we are unfortunately familiar with reports of horrific abuses down through the years. Here are some that are specific to Scotland. In January, this child abuse ring warned a potential life sentence. When you read the details of these cases, they actually turn your stomach with the horrific abuses that have been committed against children. And this has implications when it comes to safeguarding. States there that safeguarding should be a key governance priority for all charities. So our main motivation for safeguarding is our biblical mandate to care for those who are at risk of harm. But there are other implications that we need to think about in terms of our charity status. As we've seen in the past, that organizations like Oxfam and Save the Children have had adverse reactions from the public because of safeguarding failures in their practices. So we have a broad sweeping responsibility to make sure that we are keeping pace with best practice in child protection. Child protection is something that has a long history going back a couple of centuries. And we have seen down through the years, again, some really horrific cases of child abuse. And the case reviews that have come out of those incidences have all stated, there are lessons to learn, and we will do everything that we can to make sure that it never happens again, but it happens again. For the reason I stated before, we're living in an evil world. We cannot stop abuse, but we can seek to limit abuse. More recent cases of abuse, again, have shown that the depth of depravity that human beings can perpetrate towards children, babies. And it is really heartbreaking. You read about these things, but they are a reality that happen not just in the secular world, but also within the church. Landmark case in 2000, Victoria Colombier. And as a result of the case review, those who did the review came up with this map. And this map represents the number of professionals who came into contact with Victoria Colombier, who had the opportunity to take note of the danger that she was in, that was being perpetrated by her aunt. And they were all missed. They were all missed. And it just shows you that within an organization, you can have there's many people who are trained and who have responsibilities, but yet things can still get missed. One of the problems there is that oftentimes, especially within the church context, there is a view that, well, it doesn't happen here. It's not happening here. And this kind of mindset of denial can lead to missed opportunities. So, and hence is why we're doing this training to raise our awareness and our ability to take note of possible dangers to those who are at risk. In the UK, 500,000 children suffer abuse in the UK every year. In 2022, the NSPCC helpline contacted agencies about 22,505 children to investigate abuse and neglect concerns. That's an average of 62 children a day. On average, one child is killed a week in the UK. Research among 2,275 young people aged 11 to 17 about their experiences of sexual abuse suggests that around 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused. Again, horrific figures. There is an estimate of 2.4 million adults age 16 years and over experienced domestic abuse in the year ending March 2022. So these are figures that pertain to England and Wales, but they do highlight the prevalence of abuse. And you can see the disturbing figures there. January 2022 marked the official recognition of the impact on children as victims of domestic abuse in the new Domestic Abuse Act, and we will unpack that a little later on. Police made 245,000 referrals to social services for domestic abuse in 2020, 2021. We fear this could be just the tip of the iceberg. So most of the time, the figures that are produced, well, all the time, the figures that are produced simply show those instances of abuse that have been discovered. They don't show the myriad of cases that never come to light. Both males and females can be abused, although more girls call childline than boys, according to their statistics. It's not just adults that abuse children, and this is disturbing. 65.9% of the contact sexual abuse reported by children and young people was perpetrated by other but children and young people. Now, let me pause there for a moment and just throw out the question. Why do you think that might be, especially in the last 10 years or so? Why do you think there would be a drastic increase in the numbers of incidences of abuse reported by children, perpetrated by other children? What factor in the last 10 years do you think might be contributing to that?
If I could just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think with the increase of social media use, and it's availability to them, that demographic.
Yeah.
They are quite exposed and open to sexuality, and everything that surrounds it. And then second to that, young people are accessible to young people.
Yeah.
So they, they cluster together, they're amongst each other, and so you'll find that it's easier for them to explore these things that they're seeing
Yeah.
on social media with
Yeah.
those who are there with. Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head. The rise of the availability of social media and accessibility to smartphones is the primary factor in the drastic increase of abuse by children on children. And in terms of how we deal with that, we will speak about um, dealing with disclosures of abuse. But let me say this now that where there are instances of children who have abused other children, we deal with it in the same way that we would deal with adults abusing children. Um, the only difference here is that we have to have two vulnerable individuals here, but the procedure that we go through is exactly the same when it's children on children and adults on children. A child is usually abused by someone they know or trust, such as a teacher, scout leader, someone from church or home. Over 90% of sexually abused children are abused by somebody that they know. And we will reiterate that a little more as we go through. Girls 4 times as likely to be victims of abuse. There were more than 8,000 offenses committed against 14-year-olds, making it the most common age group to report offenses. 12,374 sex crimes recorded against children under 10, and 449 offenses were recorded against babies yet to reach their first birthday. Again, highlighting the depth of depravity that is out there. So the systemic protection of abusers, one of the reasons why abuse happens is because people turn blind eyes. And when we're dealing with organizations, whether it be schools, or whether it be youth clubs, whether it be um, media organizations, oftentimes there can be a wall of protection around those who perpetrate abuse. For example, some of these individuals. Now, when I was growing up as a child, some of these guys were they were childhood um, friends on the screen. Rolf Harris with his used to do his painting thing. Stuart Hall, It's a Knockout. And for those of you who are old enough and from the UK. And of course, Jimmy Savile, who the worst perpetrator of sexual abuse that has been discovered in this country. And the thing with these individuals is that the systems in which they worked, there were so many rumors about them, but yet there were people who protected them, people who knew but they didn't say anything, other people who even knew but they just pretended as if nothing was happening, or even facilitated the abuse that was taking place. So this can be a big challenge. I remember watching a documentary about the R&B singer R. Kelly. Again, when I was growing up, I used to be a great R. Kelly fan. Um, and he was a guy who built an organization around him, had people who were supplying teenage girls to this guy. So many people knew that was going on, but it took years for it to actually come to light and for him to be prosecuted. He's now finally in prison for his crimes. But the disturbing thing about it, not just the crimes that were committed, but the system that actually facilitated those crimes. We are familiar with the history of Catholic Church, sex abuse within Catholicism. You know, there are still cases of non-recent abuse that are coming to light. And the thing about the Catholic Church is that because of their history, a shocking history of abuse, um, and shocking cover-ups of abuse, because oftentimes when abuse came to light, the hierarchy of the church, rather than and take action, report these individuals, um, would cover it up. They just moved them to another place, and this happened for many years. But the upshot of it is that the Catholic Church now has a system of child protection that is second to none. I mean, their systems are very robust, and they've had to do that because of their history and the need to put their house in order. And I have long said that we as a Seventh-day Adventist church need to make sure that we put our house in order, that we don't wait until some massive scandal has come to light before we start doing what we need to do. And so we have been working to make sure that our policies and procedures are up to date. But policies and procedures are just ink on paper. You can have the best policy in the world, but unless it is implemented, and unless there is accountability for that implementation, then the policy itself is not worth the paper it's written on. So there has been an investigation, which concluded in 2021, but there are plans to extend this inquiry, and it is the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. And it said that some religious organizations in England and Wales were morally failing children. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was not part of this review. And I wondered to myself, if we were part of this review, what would it discover? What would it show? So here are some of the failings that were pointed out in the inquiry. Victim blaming, not openly discussing matters of sexuality. And if you think about that for a moment, well, when was the last time in your church context you heard a presentation on sexuality? Obviously, the sermon on Sabbath morning is not necessarily the ideal place to have that conversation or to address that issue, but how do we create the forum where we can have these conversations, not just with our young people, but also with adults, because there are all kinds of issues around sexuality that we don't talk about, that we should talk about. So that's an issue. Abuse of power by religious leaders, spiritual abuse, which is using ecclesiastical authority to perpetrate harm against another individual, and that can also happen in a family context, where a parent can be spiritually abusive to their children. Men dominating in leadership. Now, as a church, historically, we've had many discussions about women in leadership, but this is not really what this is about. This is about the willingness for victims of abuse, or how safe they feel to be able to report instances of abuse, when the only people who are available for them to report to are male. There can be a reluctance there. So even in contexts where men make up the majority of a church leadership, we need to make sure that victims of abuse have avenues where they can report safely, whoever that may be. So again, that's about raising awareness as to where those disclosures can be made and who are the safe people to whom those disclosures can be made. Mistrust of non-religious agencies. I touched on this at the beginning, where there is a reluctance to cooperate with outside agencies. And sometimes this is due to the fear that the secular world are conspiring against us. They want to destroy us, and there's a mentality that says you shouldn't trust anybody outside the walls of our church, which is a dangerous attitude to hold. I mentioned there are organizations out there who are better equipped to deal with abuse than we are. And we need to build trust and open relationships with them. And the misuse of the concept of forgiveness. And this is a big one. And we've put a new section in our appendices dealing with forgiveness, because a misunderstanding of the concept of forgiveness can lead people or rather a misunderstanding of the concept of forgiveness can put pressure on people to place themselves in dangerous situations, because they believe that forgiving means that they have to expose themselves to possible future danger. But we need to make very clear that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. We also need to make it clear that forgiveness does not obviate responsibility. So, yes, we can extend forgiveness and love and compassion and support, but people need to be held accountable for their choices, and they need to deal with the consequences that go along with those decisions. So these are areas that we need to address. I have a specific presentation that unpacks each one of these, and maybe I'll share that on another occasion. But we need to be aware that the government are very hot on scrutinizing how churches operate when it comes to safeguarding, which highlights our need to make sure that we put our house in order. So let me open the mic again to ask, what do you think are the barriers against safeguarding? What might get in the way of us practicing effective safeguarding measures within our churches? What might get in the way?
I think one of it is cultural differences. In some culture,
yeah.
Every culture is one of the avenues as a hindrance to our reporting this significance. The other thing, again, we look at our church. What would people think? What would people say? And therefore, we do not report it.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. And we'll come back to those two. Any others? What kind of obstacles?
There can be lack of trust from members. So the inability to fellowship together can make someone not have the trust to confront those issues and disclose them to someone, because they don't have a circle around them that they can trust.
Right. The lack of safety. They don't feel safe enough to be able to disclose. Brilliant. Any others?
Judgmental, I guess.
Again?
Judgmental.
Unpack that for me.
People are afraid to be judged.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are all. Sorry, go on.
Personality. I think also misuse, forgiveness is misused. Where there are cases, children are abused, and it's just because maybe of authority, somebody has said, just they say sorry to the child, while and the case is covered up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're all on point. Let's go through some of them. So you mentioned cultural acceptance. So norms and behaviors differ from culture to culture. What is may be deemed discipline in one culture may be seen as abuse in another. Fear of reprisal, you kind of touched on that. Fears of retaliation from the abuser. Misplaced priorities. The number one concern when it comes to dealing with abuse, the number one concern is the safety of the individuals within the family context, within the church context. It is not about preserving family units. So some people will step back and say, oh, okay, well, it's private. We shouldn't get involved. No, we have a responsibility. Deference, the desire to protect people of in quotes, high standing. And we have seen this within the church. It's infuriating when we see people who are guilty of abuse, but yet because of the standing they have within a particular community, we see them restored to positions and giving them access to abuse further. And not necessarily in this country, but we have seen it at high levels where the deference that is given to certain individuals prevent them from experiencing the consequences of their actions. And so we need to be very careful. You know, this idea of touch not the Lord's anointed, which is one of the most misunderstood passages in the Bible. When somebody violates God's law, they need to be held accountable for that, no matter who they are. Shame culture. This can be a massive barrier. I think of one instance. There's a guy called Stephen Tracy who wrote a book called Mending Soul Wounds. Anyway, he did a lot of work in a particular area in overseas. And he said that there was a woman who had been the victim of brutal rape by soldiers. And when she returned to her village, the women in her village treated her abysmally. They also abused her. They slapped her, kicked her, spat on her because she had been violated by these soldiers. And it doesn't make sense, but when you have a shame culture, the emphasis can be on protecting the good name of a community rather than protecting the vulnerable people within that community. Some people, when it comes to domestic abuse, for example, some people would rather endure the abuse, endure the violence, rather than have it known that they are in a marriage where violence is taking place because of this high sense of shame. Apathy, the lack of desire to get involved in other people's business. Well, we have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Proverbs 31:8, the passage we began with, highlights that. Moral justification. The belief that the abuse is the right thing to do. So some people feel, you know, how I discipline my children is my business. No government, nobody has the right to tell me how to raise my child. So they feel that the moral justification allows them to do what they do. There is denial. closing our ears to and our minds to the idea that abuse is happening. When the subject of abuse was addressed by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the 1970s, I recall I was doing some research about sexual abuse in the church, and there was a discussion at the level of the Adventist Review about whether or not they should address the topic of abuse. And it was felt that now, is this a big enough issue for us to deal with in our publication? And eventually they decided to. As a result of that publication, there were literally sacks full, dustbin liners full of letters coming in, reporting abuse that had taken place, perpetrated by leaders, Pathfinder leaders, pastors, elders, and it opened the eyes to the reality of abuse within the context of the church. Up until that point, people felt, that this doesn't take place in our church. So denial can be a very big barrier. We have to open our eyes to the reality of what is happening in our world. Can you think of any other barriers that there may be to safeguarding? Anything else come to mind? Okay, let's just press on. So, go ahead.
Yes, friendship. The perpetrator might be your friend, and you cover up. You don't want the other person who has been damaged to talk about it. Oh, he's my friend. He wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't do that. Yep. So I think this is another obstacle in the reporting and addressing the issue.
Yeah. And it's a big deal, because when you have very close relationships, and something comes to light that requires you to hold those friends accountable, it can be a very difficult thing to do. So yeah, absolutely right.
But that also goes along with disbelieving the child, doesn't it?
Yeah. And what the research shows is that children, very, very rarely do children make up stories of abuse. It's just not part of their makeup to come up with something like that. So yeah, our expectation and our understanding of children can be a barrier, because we can take the view that they're just making things up. They're lying. We don't believe the child. But when it comes to safeguarding, we have a responsibility that is backed up by a legal requirement that once a child makes an accusation, or discloses abuse, we have an obligation to take that somewhere. Self-blame. Yeah, that's another barrier. So individuals, especially individuals who have been victims of emotional abuse, because emotional abuse always underpins every other form of abuse. Remember, abuse is an abuse of power, a pattern of abuse over a period of time. So if somebody is subjected to emotional abuse, that may include physical abuse, they may come to a point where they feel that they deserve it. And if they deserve it, why are they going to complain about it? They just have to put up with it because that's their lot. So yeah, absolutely, self-blame can be another big barrier. And again, that highlights why we need to talk about these things, why we need to get it out into the open so that people can understand the nature of abuse, and that it's not their fault. You can never cause somebody to abuse you. Abuse is always the decision of the abuser. No matter what you do, no matter how much, even if you provoke somebody, abuse is something that is done by the abuser, and it's never the fault of the abused. So the greatest obstacle in dealing with abuse is to believe that it's not happening. So the ethos of our policy is that the safety of children and adults at risk is our paramount concern. All the other concerns have to come secondary. It's about the safety of the individuals. If you have somebody in a marriage who is a victim of domestic violence, your concern is not about the effect that it's going to have on the family. Your primary concern is making sure that that individual is separated from that abuse. Your primary concern is the children within, if there are children within that household, because allowing children to witness abuse is also a form of abuse. So safety is our paramount concern. So let's look at again some more statistics on the prevalence of abuse. We mentioned the 1 in 20, 90% know the abused person. Third of sexual abuse is committed by other children. Over 27,000 children needing protection from neglect. 130,000 children live in households with high risk of domestic abuse, and 1 in 5 children have been exposed to domestic abuse. And what the statistics show about domestic abuse and children is that the physiological impact that witnessing abuse has on children is the same as if those children are physically abused themselves. How it triggers their response to fear in the brain, it's the same as if they've actually experienced the physical violence. So what makes children feel safe? This is a brief video. Let me turn up the volume. Yeah.
I feel safe when I have adults around me because there's not a lot of time that I'm going to get bullied. They help me with my problems and help me fight them. I feel safe when adults don't shout at me and call me names. When I have a problem, I always talk to the teacher and they always sort it out. There's always a suitable adult that you can talk to and they're not really going to get angry with you. If somebody's rude to me, I can just ask my parents or the teacher. There's no strangers around me and I know everyone, and they all make me feel happy. I feel safe when the school is really secure and nobody can get in. And we feel safe by staying around the playground where strangers are not there.
The environment is safe. For example, when there's like chairs about, we push them out of the way and just use the place really safely.
When we play games, we make it safe so we have bigger room to play. It's basically like a big area. You can like see all around it, so you're not really going to get lost or anything. I feel safe when.
I think it's important to have rules and procedures because if you don't, then like things will just get hectic.
Let's say there wasn't any rules, and people will be fighting all over and like bullying. When you have more fun, it makes you feel more safe, being happy and being protected.
Okay, now just watching that brief video, does anything jump out of you when you think about your own context in church? Anything that jumps out at you?
I think for me, what jumped out was they talked about having trusted adults around, but also how the trusted adult behaves, like not name calling, not shouting, because I've grown up in the church and kids are very intuitive and kids are good at reading people. So from a young age, you know which adult is unapproachable, which adult is approachable. So yeah, not just a trusted adult, but a trusted adult that is approachable and has a nice manner about them.
Yeah. I think that is so important. You know, there is a reason why Jesus attracted children. You know, children have this sense about who is safe and who is not safe. And I remember I was in one church where when elder was talking to a little boy, and the boy was just being a boy, and the elder said to him, "Come here, you little devil." And I thought to myself, why would you talk to a child like that? You know, Solomon says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. So we need to be very careful, not just what we say, but how we say it. And you're so right. It's important for us to be the kind of approachable person that people can feel, that children can feel safe with, because children will not disclose to somebody that they don't trust. It's just common sense. That's the same with us as adults. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Anything else jump out at you from that brief feedback?
So something that jumped out to me, Pastor, that that I didn't think about. As important as it is for trustworthy people to be in and around the children, the vulnerable, their environment. So the bit about moving the chairs away, etc. Our church space is small. So in the break time, the children are playing amongst the cars. We keep our church gate open for Sabbath. It's an automatic gate that we keep open on Sabbath just for free flow of vehicles. But all of those things are now coming into my mind, thinking, okay, are we really creating a safe environment for them? You know, do they have the space to play? If they are to be playing on the Sabbath, there is some debate about that still. You know, are we really providing for them that environment where they are kept safe?
Very, very good point that you've highlighted there. And it's important for us as churches to do risk assessments. Not just risk assessments in terms of a particular event that we're going to run, but a general risk assessment of our church. You know, just take a walk around and just look at the layout of the church. What's the furniture like? Access like? Are there areas that are hidden away and where abuse can be perpetrated? All these kind of things we need to take into account. In the policy and procedures, it has a form where we can do a risk assessments, but it's important for us as you know, one of the duties of your safeguarding lead is to just do that risk assessment, just to make sure that the environment that we are operating in is safe for children. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Anything else that struck you?
Well, for me, I'll just paraphrase what I heard, that they feel safe where there are rules. It's like young people want to know what the rules are, to wait until they make a mistake, and then that's when you raise your voice, you shout at them, then they are kind of like confused. Okay, I didn't know I shouldn't do that. So I think giving them clear instruction, clear rules, so that they know what they cannot do is far much better than waiting until a mistake is made and then we scare kids.
Yeah, and I like that. You know, and that's a general rule for dealing with children, whether or not it's within the context of the church or whether it's parenting. Children need to be very clear about what the boundaries are, because if they don't know what the boundaries are, how do they know if they've stepped over, if they've transgressed the boundary? So we need to be very clear in communicating to our children what's required of them. So, excellent. Any others before we move on?
Okay. I think.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think refresh session every year for everyone who obviously are in leadership to really review about how important we are in the safeguarding of the children, and that when they come, you know, they can get the best and develop the best.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's one of the areas that we highlighted in the updated policy and procedures was the need to refresh training. And one of the requirements that we have added into the policy and procedures was the need for pastors to do safeguarding training at least every 2 years to make sure that they're up to date. But again, that's something that is necessary for us to do because circumstances change, and our memories, may not necessarily be the best, and we need continual reminding about what our responsibilities are so that we don't fall short. So thank you for that. All right.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I hope it's not out of context or out of topic. I was just thinking of inclusiveness as well and treating all the children the same. Because you would find that one child makes a mistake and they're treated differently from the other child who makes exactly the same mistake. Yeah. So I think when we treat children, if they're misbehaving and stuff, we should all treat them with one rule. Not that, oh, this child does not offend all the time, but this one does all the time. So labeling the children as well and treating them differently makes the children not feel fair.
Yeah. Be consistent and be fair. Yeah, thank you for that.
Another one, sorry, before you go, another one which I love, one of the children actually said they want to feel secure. They want to feel that the people they are around you make them
sorry,
safe.
your mic's not very clear. Is there anything they can do to not hearing you very clearly? It's very muffled.
Let me type.
Okay, well, let's take Donovan in the meantime, and we'll come back to that. Or was that Donovan?
Maybe she could write it down.
Yeah. Maybe put it briefly in the chat. Okay. Here's a question. Why do
Hi,
we
can you?
Hello?
Hi, did you ask me to come in?
Was that Donovan? You got your hand raised?
Yes. Just a quick one.
Yeah.
I know maybe this might be a bit of a sidetrack, but I just wanted to see if we have considered that the church is built up of families.
Yes.
And I feel like safeguarding should start from families' point of view. Whether the church has empowered members to observe these things from from family circles, from community circles, then this develops that when we meet for maybe 5-6 hours, which is our church time, it really shortens the work of the church. What I'm trying to look at is not overloading. I'm not saying the church should not have its responsibilities as an organization. No, but what I'm just trying to say is we empower members to do what is right. And since children and adults spend 6 days with their parents, it is right. This is where maybe our focus should be to give them the tools so that they are more alert to observe these things. Then if the church can then help to foster that, that's my
I agree with you 100%, and that's a principle that goes across the board, not just for safeguarding, but it's because the Ellen White talks about the fact that the family is a little church. So if we can put the right principles in place within the family context, it makes it easier for us to supplement those within the church context. So yeah, thank you for that. All right, we're going to move on. So why do we think that the church is a target? Why do abusers target churches? And it may sound like an obvious question, but why is that? Why would they? Why do abusers target churches?
I think
Because we're
church is,
trusting.
Because we're trusting, absolutely.
I was going to say, because the church is actually a soft target in terms of it's an open door community. It
And it's
receives
designed to be a welcoming community.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We don't vet who comes in, who shouldn't come in. So that leaves us open to abuse.
Also, I think many people think that church supposed to be godly, and everything that takes place within a church is right. But also we have to realize that we are in the great controversy, and Satan would use that avenue in order to conceal the work that he wants people to do.
Yeah.
And we have to be so very, very careful and mindful. Parents themselves think, well, nothing will go wrong with my child in the church. So it's another mind shift that we need to have, that things can go wrong anywhere we are, among anybody, because of the time, especially in which we are living now.
Yeah, absolutely. So was that Dorothy?
No, that was Yvonne.
Okay, see a hand. Did Dorothy had a hand raised, or if it's gone now?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's easier in the church because of many misconstrued views in terms of scripture, how people interpret scripture.
Yes.
So it's an easy target because there's judge for you, do not judge so that you will not be judged, scriptures like that. So it's easier for them to be in such a setting because they feel that they've got scriptures to back them for their actions.
Absolutely. The misuse of scripture is a key factor in the perpetration of abuse across the board. Thank you for that.
Add something, Pastor Leslie. My background is a secondary school teacher.
Yes.
And I very clearly observe a stark difference in our policies and procedures in terms of safeguarding. And they don't seem to be very stringent at all.
As rigorous.
There is such a, there's, if I can use the term, void of policies to keep our church safe, whereas in schools there is such a, it's a pretty robust structure there.
Yeah.
And yet the sort of individuals that we come across, whether they're in schools or in the church, we've got vulnerable adults and we've got children in the same context.
Yeah.
So I think we need more robust policies and so on within the church.
Yeah. Let's have a look. Perpetrators tend to target voluntary sector because it tends to be less regulated, and I think you made the point about the church is more of a soft target for abusers, which is why we need to toughen up the regulations, as Pastor Massey have just said, toughen up our policies and procedures. But the obvious answer, the simple answer as to why abusers target churches and target schools is because that's where children are. It's that's where the people are that they want to abuse. So we should not be surprised when people target these organizations. Now, wouldn't it be easy if abusers look like the guy on the left there? If abusers were easy to identify, but oftentimes the abusers look like everybody else. I was talking with somebody just yesterday. We came to light that somebody we knew has been found to have been guilty of abuse, and never in a million years would we have even thought that was capable, that this individual was capable of that kind of behavior. They don't, they don't have a sign on their foreheads saying that I am an abuser. So here's the thing. When it comes to grooming tactics, we'll unpack what grooming is. Grooming is simply behavior that is designed to increase opportunities for abuse. But how do we tell the difference between grooming behavior and healthy caring and mentoring? Because they can look very similar. We want our youth leaders to be able to build a relationship of trust with our young people. We want them to be able to relate well to them. We want them to spend time with our young people. Groomers do the same thing. So how do we tell the difference between what is a healthy relationship between our folks who mentor young people and a grooming relationship? Any ideas? How do you tell the difference? Or what indicates that there is something wrong in the dynamic?
I'm not giving an answer here. I love that you asked for ideas because that's all I can give in this situation. But I would say that if we stay away from less one-to-ones, private interaction, make it more group environment, open in the public, that type of thing. There are times when there will be one-to-one mentorship, I'm sure. But even then, make it in scenarios where it's monitored by parents, for example, so that, because if that's not happening, that's when we would need then become suspicious. If you're asking for one-to-one, come and meet me here, that type of thing, then we need to be cautious.
Good point. Excellent point. Is that Ellery and Shirley?
I was going to say something similar. Transparency. Perpetrators want to hide meeting children, whereas people who are genuinely interested are open about what they're doing, where they're going, who they're with.
Yeah. So openness, yeah, brilliant, excellent. Any others? Is that Kuda? How you pronounce your name?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. I was also going to say, like, like when you're dealing with children, it's important to also have someone who's there listening, like when you're addressing an issue or when there's something that has been planned. Like, it's important to not just like do it on your own, because there's more or less risk of being perpetrated to say you said this or you said that and all. I think it's always a matter of like trust, to always have like a few more people who are around you, so it doesn't make you seem like you're doing something that is wrong. And also just to be aware of how, like, who our children want to be close to, it's also important, to know that those people they're hanging around with, can be anyone, who can also try like to hurt them or to abuse them and things like that. So just to be more wary of what's going on when your child is hanging around someone too much and things like that. Yeah, so like it's important to just have that awareness, and also to just be, really mindful. Where is my child? If you don't see your child, where is your child? Because anyway.
Yeah, there needs to be a great awareness. Know the child. So I think the point in the chat was, observe the child, understand, watch their behavior. How has their behavior changed adversely? What's going on there? Body language is also important. Yep, absolutely. Be observant. Pastor Massey, you had a point.
Sorry, yeah. I think my contribution was just mentioned earlier, but perhaps I can reiterate the fact that you're talking about the difference between grooming behavior and healthy, caring, mentoring. And I'd probably just say that when there's grooming behavior, then you notice negative changes in character. With healthy mentoring and caring, you notice the positive changes in their character, perhaps, you know, their spiritual development and so on. But certainly within grooming, you know, you notice odd changes in character, things that are, you know, odd to the normal characteristics.
But the danger with that is that sometimes you don't see those changes immediate. That it's over a period of time when the adverse reactions are observable. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Oh, Ifeoma? Yeah, we got a couple of hands up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in addition to the many suggestions and ideas shared, it's also very important that parents are open to their children.
Yes.
And allow them access to themselves.
Yeah.
Because as much as we want to parent and discipline our children, we want to be their best friend, their first point of call.
Yeah.
And they should come back home and tell you what they have been through and how they have been dealt with. Yeah. So we should really give them access to ourselves.
Yeah.
And in addition to observing them and ensuring that they are with the people they really want to be with.
Absolutely. We need to be the safe place for our children. You know, swinging back to a point that was made earlier about the preparation that needs to be made within the home. As parents, we need to alert children as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Yeah. Okay. Last point. Let's take Owen. And then we'll move on.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Hi everyone. I was going to say the point I think it's been raised a few times actually is that I see within our programs we have quite good structures there. You know, we have 2 adults where we're teaching children for Sabbath school, and there's quite a lot of regulation when we have programs. In between programs, you see wandering around the church, and very often I'm often telling children, you know, go and sit with parents. Where are your parents? Running around, and in those moments opportunities for something to happen. I mean, sometimes you find them upstairs by themselves in Edinburgh Church, and you know you got to send them back downstairs. So I think there's a responsibility for parents to know where their children are, and even it's got to be a conversation that has to be with their child, then they should be aware of that's happening.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And while you were talking, the point came to mind about churches who rent other people's buildings. And where that is the case, it is important that those churches are familiar with the safeguarding policies of those organizations, as well as our own, because sometimes their policies and procedures have additional or different information in there, or different requirements, where children can go, where they can't go. So it's very important that we are familiar with what the safeguarding procedures are with the venues that we are operating in, and again, that we do make sure that we know where our children are at all times. All right, so as I said before, grooming is pattern behavior designed to increase opportunities for sexual assault. And when you look at that list there, you can see the similarities between the acceptable behavior and unacceptable. So when it comes to targeting the victim, gaining trust, filling a need, isolating the victim, there is an escalation. It begins with what appears to be innocent contact, but then it escalates to the point where abuse takes place and the maintaining of control through threats or other means. So grooming tactics, targeting the victim. Sexual offenders look for vulnerability. emotional neediness, isolation, and low self-confidence, as well as less parental attention. It's as if these abusers have a radar that they're able to identify children who are particularly vulnerable to abuse. They gain trust. And again, this is something that we want to do with our children, but for the right purposes. Offenders watch to get to know their victims and their needs. The predator may introduce secrecy and build up trust. They seek to fulfill certain needs. The predators may give gifts, affection, or attention to take, forgive bad English there, so that they take on a more important role in the child's life. And then there is the isolation. The offender may offer to babysit the child for free or do other favors in order to find ways to be alone with the child. And here is one of the things that we need to be aware of. That when it comes to grooming children is not just about grooming the child. The abusers usually groom the environment. They groom the parents, gain trust with the parents so that they can gain access to the child. And the maintaining of control, I mentioned before, that can be through threats against parents, threats about what they will do to the children, even spiritual abuse about how God will be angry with them if they say anything. The abuser may also blame the child. There was allowing it the abuser may also blame the child for allowing it to happen or normalize it by saying it's okay. There was a research study that was done of abusers, and it showed that a large percentage of those abusers blamed the child for the abuse that took place. So their minds are so twisted that they were able to justify the abuse which they perpetrated by blaming the child for the abuse. Grooming begins with non-sexual touching, such as accidental or playful touching, to desensitize the child so that the child does not resist a more sexualized touch. The offender then exploits the child's curiosity to advance the sexuality of the interaction. I remember watching this documentary about Michael Jackson leaving Neverland. And one of the things that struck me about the whole dynamic around the children who he was accused of abusing was how easily the parents allowed their children or allowed Jackson access to their children, even allowed their children to sleep in the same bed as Jackson. They're fully aware, but they went ahead and allowed that anyway because he had done such a successful job of grooming them before gaining access to their children. Disturbing stuff. So those working with children and young people must observe safety protocols for electronic communication. This is one of the areas that we have bolstered up in the new policy and procedures. But yeah, be very careful. We a while ago had to let go of an employee in the church who engaged in inappropriate text messaging with a young person. And what was inappropriate about it was not just the language that would use over familiar language, texting and early morning, late at night, which just gave too much cause for concern. So we need to be very careful to observe the protocols in our policy and procedures. Point has been made already a couple of times, but most abuse against children happens at home. So as much as we can highlight, stranger danger and make our children aware to be as safe as possible, most abuse against children happens at home. So let's look at some of the types of abuse. Sexual abuse that's involves forcing or enticing a vulnerable person to take part in sexual activities through physical touch, words, or sight. So you don't necessarily, there doesn't necessarily have to be physical contact for sexual abuse to take place. Exposing children to nudity, pornographic material, all of that constitutes sexual abuse, and similarly with adults at risk of harm. Spiritual abuse, this is the use of spiritual authority to cause emotional or psychological harm. We mentioned this earlier. And when we're talking about spiritual abuse, we need to be clear on what we are referring to, because the term spiritual abuse can have so many different connotations. But within the fields of safeguarding, it is specifically referring to emotional and psychological abuse within a religious context. So that can happen within the church, and it can also happen within the home. But spiritual abuse is slightly different from other forms of abuse, in that a person can perpetrate spiritual abuse believing that they are doing the right thing, but yet the impact of their behavior causes harm to the vulnerable. Physical abuse, any form of abuse which intentionally causes physical harm. And here is where, there is a difference of opinion in terms of whether it's appropriate to use physical chastisement against children. The law in the UK is that, I'm not sure what it is in Scotland, and I'm stand to be corrected, but in the UK, you cannot physically chastise in a way that leaves a mark, and you cannot use an implement. I don't know if anybody can give me any pointers as to what the situation is in Scotland now. Is it any different? No smacking at all. Okay,
yeah.
Kind of suspected that might be a difference there, but yeah, okay. And again, that cuts across cultural lines. And I've heard people say that nobody's going to tell them how they're going to raise their children. Neglect. The persistent failure to meet basic physical and or psychological needs. Neglect is the most prevalent form of abuse of children. Emotional abuse, persistent maltreatment so as to cause adverse effects on the victim's emotional well-being. So there are the different types of abuse. So some of the signs of abuse. So sexual abuse, bruising in the genital area, change in sexual behavior. If children are saying things that you wouldn't expect somebody of their age to say, difficulty walking or sitting, STDs, obviously, torn, stained, bloody underwear, self-harming, allegations of abuse. So we need to be tuned into our children. If we see some significant changes in their behavior, we need to find out what is going on there. Emotional abuse, denial of choice, withdrawal, when children withdraw into a shell or they become nervous in a way that is different from how they usually operate. Infantilization, when they kind of regress into thumb sucking, bed wetting, things like that is an indication of something going wrong. Bullying or harassment is a factor. Children who become depressed or anxious. Verbal abuse, is another form of emotional abuse. Deprivation of social contact. So sometimes people who, parents, for example, may use forms of punishment or discipline that go too far. And the reality is that any form of abuse, any form of discipline we use can become abusive if we carry it too far. Any form of abuse, whether it's physical abuse, whether it's withdrawal of privileges, whether it's sending children to their room, there is a line that we should not cross. Neglect, if children looked uncared for or unhappy, maybe they're withdrawn or become aggressive, maybe they have lingering health problems or injuries, weight loss, dehydration, a lack of medical care. And the thing is that with these can be indications. So we may see some of these and it may raise a red flag. It doesn't necessarily mean that abuse is taking place, but it does mean that we just need to be aware and just maybe ask a question or two. Dorothy.
I just wanted to say, the state has also added another form of abuse on abuse, and that's financial abuse.
Yeah.
So the misuse of any funds or finances to an individual is considered as financial abuse. So, for instance, children, inappropriate use of even their child benefits is considered as financial abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we will touch on that as we go through a little later. But yeah, absolutely correct. Okay, so common sites of accidental physical injuries, because we don't want to jump on any little mark we see on a child and assume that abuse is taking place. So there are common sites. Children, they're into the rough and tumble. Children can be constantly getting scuffs and bruises. And the common areas are those displayed as you see there. However, there are other areas, and you will get a copy of this presentation if you wish, so that you can go over this in more detail. But here we see indications of areas where we see injuries that we would not necessarily expect to see injuries. And if we see them, the buttocks, the thighs, the back, skull, the ears, these should raise red flags for us. And when it comes to suspicions of abuse, we should never sit on those suspicions by ourselves. If you have a reasonable concern that a child may be a victim of abuse, be it sexual or physical abuse, take it somewhere. And that taking it somewhere may simply be having a conversation with your designated safeguarding lead, just to see whether or not you're maybe blowing things out of proportion, or whether or not there is something that you need to take further. Just checking the last comment in the chat. Yeah, these changes don't have to be overt or gross. Even subtle changes should elicit appropriate responses from concerned and informed safeguarding officials or individuals. Absolutely. So yeah, any concern that you have, consult with your designated safeguarding lead. Other types of abuse mentioned already: witnessing domestic abuse, financial or economic abuse, organizational abuse, so care homes for adults at risk of harm, child and adult trafficking, bullying, honor-based violence, modern slavery, organized abuse, online abuse, and I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list. So we go into more detail in the policy and procedures. Please take time to go through that. All right, it is now 27 minutes past 11. Can we take a no? Not can we take a break? We will take a break. Is 10 minutes okay? Yeah, I see one thumbs up. All right, let's say let's start back at 22. Yeah, so 22. Please be ready to start again. Everybody, and let's crack on with looking at the impact of abuse. Impact has many there are many ways in which people are impacted by abuse, and you can see some of them on the screen. Can cause anger issues, fear issues, physical injury, guilt, suicidal ideation, can result in poor emotional regulation, stress-related illnesses, shame, can adversely affect relationships, can lead to reckless behavior. And these are just some of the different impacts that abuse can have, both short-term and long-term. Now, interesting, Ellen White said this in The Great Controversy. She said, the impressions made on the heart early in life are seen in after years. They may be buried, but they will seldom be obliterated. One of the most devastating impacts of sexual abuse, particularly within the context of the church, is the effect that it has on the individual's view of who God is. There is few ways that trust can be betrayed than abuse within the church. And Ellen White talks about the fact that the lasting impact from what happens to us in childhood, may be buried, but the effects of it may stay with us for a very, very long time. Here's another short video I want you to have a look at. And again, as you look at it, just make note of anything that particularly strikes you. So this is looking at, again, the lasting impact that abuse can have on children.
Everyone in a community has a vested interest in everyone else's children, because everyone else's children determine the next adult population that makes for a successful society. Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they ask the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development. Certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
Science points to 4 categories of this spectrum of neglect. The first category would be what's called occasional inattention, when children experience responsiveness most of the time, but occasionally adults don't respond. There's no harm in that, and in fact, there's probably some benefit.
A child can learn to self-soothe and explore the environment, and all of those opportunities build brain architecture.
The second category, scientists would call chronic understimulation, is where on a regular basis, children have less interaction with the adults around them than is needed for healthy development.
Those children typically, when provided with enriched learning opportunities and more typical levels of serve and return, will show catch-up.
The third category is what science would call severe neglect in a family where not only are there prolonged periods of inattention and lack of responsiveness, but often also associated with not being fed enough, not being bathed enough, not having basic needs met.
Neglect is a huge problem in the US. Children are much more likely to be neglected than they are to experience any other kind of maltreatment.
We see the child really being at risk for much more substantial kinds of deficits down the road that don't necessarily get easily fixed or ameliorated. This is where we really need to think about more complicated and often more intensive strategies to help undo those effects.
The fourth category, called severe neglect, generally found in institutional settings, is a result of children living in kind of warehoused type situation in orphanages.
And it doesn't have to even be as extreme as orphanages. It can be experiences that are regretfully occurring in many, many parts of our country.
Often institutional care in this country is under the euphemistic name of transitional care or temporary care or assessment facilities.
If you think about what institutional or residential care would look like for an infant, where there's somebody new coming on to the shift every 8 hours, it really alters the development of the child's brain architecture and other aspects of the child's development.
We have the potential to change children's developmental trajectories.
Interventions can apply to parents, to foster parents or adoptive parents, childcare settings, Head Start settings, and other kinds of settings. And really, what they're about is attuning people to the serve and return process.
Neglecting young children is neglecting the foundations of a healthy next generation. The community pays a huge price later in terms of the problems of the next generation, whether it be educational achievement, economic productivity, good citizenship, the ability to parent the next generation. All of the things that have to do with a healthy, prosperous society.
Hey, let me open up and ask you, did anything there, what struck you from that? Obviously, we're looking this short video about neglect. And when we think about child abuse, we think about sexual abuse, and we tend to think about physical abuse. We don't as often think in terms of neglect and the impact that can have. So as you were watching that, anything that jumped out at you, anything that struck you that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, neglect of the child. Not when the child can speak and the child can say, well, this happened to me and so on. Even at this tender age, you know, at say toddler age, and inattention of parents or carers, which plays a very important part in the child upbringing. And then I wonder, look at society today, and a lot of people does not know of this situation. Put the child in front of the telly or give the child something to play with, and the mother or parents or guardian would be doing something else. And that prolonged time of inattention, the effect it has on these children is phenomenal, and we do not know it. So it is very important that this is made known to everybody, so that people can be aware of it.
Yeah. One of the things that really struck me in that video, especially the first time I saw it, was when I was watching the little baby during the still face experiment, and I was starting to feel stressed for the baby. You know, and you can imagine if a child experiences that level of stress within the 2-minute little experiment, if they're experiencing that over a consistent period of time, the impact that has on their stress responses. One of the things that came out of research, there was a man called Dr. Archibald Hart, who did a lot of research around stress, and he found that children who come out of stressful environments, troubled homes, because they have a high amount of stress hormones in their system, it impacts their ability to learn. And so they don't perform particularly well at school, because stress within the system impacts the ability of the prefrontal cortex to function at its best. And so it is so important to create environments where children are relaxed. And one of the roles that we have as a church is to support parents so that they can know how to create those kind of safe environments. The video showed that neglect happens on a spectrum. Occasional neglect, which it's not a big issue, and the point was made that it can actually be positive because it helps a child to learn how to self-regulate, right up until the most serious forms of neglect. So this is something that we need to be aware of. Okay, let's move on. In the 1990s, there was a study that was conducted called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACEs for short. And the ACEs study was the largest of its kind, involved over 17,000 participants to examine the health, social, and economic effects of ACEs over the lifespan. It examined past history of abuse, family dysfunction, and current health status. And the ACEs study shifted the focus from the question was, what's wrong with you, to what happened to you. So up until that study was done, usually the basic assumption was that if a child was engaged in disruptive or problematic behavior, that the child was the problem. What the ACEs study sought to do was to shift the focus, to broaden the lens, to ask the question about what is going on within the child's environment that may be contributing to the way that they are behaving. So not so much what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. The point of the ACEs study was to look at the link between these adverse experiences in childhood and how that adversely affected long-term health outcomes. Here are some of the results. So just to go back, what they did with the ACEs project was to create a questionnaire with 10 areas highlighted. And what you scored out of those 10 areas indicated what your ACEs score would be. So what they found was ACEs scores of 4 or more out of 10 indicated an individual who would be twice as likely to smoke, 7 times more likely to use alcohol, 6 times more likely to have had sex before the age of 15, twice as likely to have been engaged or diagnosed with cancer, twice as likely to have heart disease, 4 times as likely to suffer from chronic lung disease, 12 times as likely to have attempted suicide, and 10 times more likely to have injected street drugs. So when we see these statistics, these results, it really highlights how much a child can be adversely impacted by experiences within their childhood. So the 10 areas on the questionnaire, and you can find this questionnaire online and take it yourself. It's a very easy questionnaire to fill out. Easy in terms of the procedure, but maybe not so easy if you have had a difficult childhood. It can be very triggering to see on paper how you have been impacted by your past experience. So just be prepared for that if that's something that you want to do, that it can be very triggering for some. But you can find this online, download it, or do it online for yourself. And it looked at the areas of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, alcohol abuse, member of the family being incarcerated, having somebody in the house who was chronically depressed, a mother who was treated violently, domestic abuse, absent parent, emotional, physical neglect. Now, limited to these 10 areas, in order to keep the questionnaire simple. Felt that if they put too much information in there, then people wouldn't fill it out. And so that they didn't include other areas like bullying, bereavement, poverty, growing up in a war zone, medical trauma, racism, natural disasters. So even with the results from the ACEs study as it was, it just gave a snapshot where the problem could be much more serious than the ACEs studies indicated. And what the study indicated was that when a child experiences adversity in their childhood, it can lead to disrupted neurodevelopment. We saw in that short video about the impact that continual stress can have on a baby's brain structure. Actually can cause physical changes in the brain. Neural pathways are created which reinforce fear responses, depression, anxiety responses, anxious responses. And that disrupted neurodevelopment can lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. I mentioned about children's inability to learn effectively when they have high levels of stress within their system. That's just one example. That can then lead to the adoption of health risk behaviors. So if a child is experiencing depression, if a child feels threatened, that their survival is at risk, if they are in a destructive environment, they will look for ways to self-soothe. And that might be thumb sucking, it might be developing addictions, it could lead to pornography, Gaming may be a way that a child uses to escape. They might use drugs, alcohol, smoking. All of these things may be ways to try to anesthetize emotional pain. So these at-risk or the adoption of health risk behaviors can be their way of trying to deal with the trauma that they have experienced. That can lead to all kinds of social problems, arrest from the police, disease, disabilities, and that can lead to early death. So the implications of adverse childhood experiences is very serious and far-reaching in terms of life outcomes. So another thing that the adverse childhood experiences study showed was that people with ACEs died, with 6 or more ACEs, died nearly 20 years earlier on average than those without ACEs. 20 years, that's massive. Now, when we look at the biblical kind of support for that, the Bible says, Proverbs 17:22, a merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. And listen to this from Ellen White. She says, many of the diseases from which men suffer are the result of mental depression, grief, anxiety, discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tend to break down the life forces and invite decay and death. So when Ellen White wrote, she was way ahead of her time. And she makes the connection between the emotional traumas that we experience and the physical diseases that can result from that. We as Adventists, we are very familiar with the connection between our emotions and our physical health. Another place she says when one is affected, the other sympathizes. So this is just to highlight how serious the impact of abuse can be in a child's life, that it can have lifelong effects on every aspect of their living, their emotional health, psychological health, and also their physical health. All right, another short video. Note down any points that strike you.
Childhood shapes who we become. But some young lives are being harmed by sexual abuse, and for some, this leads to significant problems in later life. Right now, on average, 1 child in 20 suffers sexual abuse. But there are actions we can all take, which when brought together, can make all children safer and help stop it from happening. First, we need a better understanding of how this abuse can happen. We know most sexual abuse is committed by a person known to the child, not a stranger. We also know that around 1/3 of child sexual abuse is committed by another child or young person. So there are practical steps everyone can take to keep children safe. Parents can ask important questions about places where their children spend their time. Does the new babysitter have trusted references? Do sports clubs employ the right people to keep children safe? At school, staff can make sure students are kept safe by checking on areas of the school that can feel unsupervised, such as quiet corridors or outside spaces. Not all sexual abuse involves direct contact. It could be seeing pornography or being groomed to perform sexual acts online. We can prevent this kind of abuse by making the online world safer for children. We can check privacy settings, parental controls, and report cyberbullies. Our NSPCC O2 helpline advisors offer free advice and support with these and any other online concerns. Our Speak Out Stay Safe program visits every primary school in the UK to teach children that abuse is never okay, that it's never their fault, and who to turn to if they are ever worried. Parents and schools can talk to their children about relationships and sexual behavior to help them understand what is and isn't okay. Sometimes sexual abuse is committed by young people, and they need support to help them understand and address their behavior. If a child does experience abuse, they need to feel safe speaking out, and they need support which helps them start to turn their life around, to have the childhood they deserve. If adults have any concerns about the safety of a child or the behavior of another adult, they can call the NSPCC helpline. We know that sexual abuse can be prevented. We know how, and we're making progress. And we know that everyone can take steps to protect our children at home, at school, and online. Together, we can all play a part in making every childhood free from sexual abuse.
Okay. All right. So that kind of reiterates much of what we have already said. Anybody want to point out anything or to raise any issues that comes out of that? As I say, it does just reiterate a lot of the things we said. One of the things it did highlight was online abuse. And that's something which can be a challenge, especially for parents, because children, our children today have grown up in a world where the internet is just the norm, and oftentimes we don't necessarily understand the technology. We don't necessarily understand how things work. So we need to educate ourselves so that we can keep our children safe online. We may need to be more proactive in limiting their access to the internet and to social media. I'm doing some research at the moment. I'm reading a book by a guy called Jonathan Haidt, who has done extensive research on the negative impact of social media and the mental health issues that have grown exponentially at the same time as children have had access to smartphones and social media. So this is an area that we really do need to pay attention to.
Pastor, I would just like to make a contribution regarding in reference to ACE, adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
With regards to keeping the church family safe, I think one of the elements that we can promote keeping the church family safe is providing a positive environment within the church with regards to keeping the church family safe, because looking at ACE, if our environment is positive and healthy, people who might have been impacted by ACE, all right, we can, with a positive environment, can help to combat those long-term effects that can result from ACE, because that way we are helping to build the resilience, of individuals despite of their childhood experiences, and helping them to become resilient is also helping them to combat those long-term effects that can result as a result of ACE. So I think one element in which we can look at keeping the church family safe is thinking about the environment that we create for children to develop, to grow, and nurture. Because that way we can support individuals who are affected by ACE.
Brilliant. I love what you've just shared there. The same gentleman who I just mentioned, Jonathan Haidt, talks about the fact that in particularly in Western culture, we have a culture of safetyism. And what he means by safetyism is that we overprotect our children. If we think about our own childhoods, think about my own childhood, some of the things that I did as a child, children don't do nowadays. Just being outdoors and climbing trees and swinging on the swings to the height of its swing and jumping up and all of this stuff that nowadays we have all these health and safety rules. You can't play conkers. If you're going to play conkers, you're going to have goggles on. And we create an environment where our children are overprotected. And the adverse impact of that is that our children don't necessarily grow the resilience that they need to deal with the society around them. So we absolutely need to teach our children how to be more resilient. And one of the ways we do that is to expose them to challenges. Obviously, we do that in a safe context, but we grow through challenge. So you're absolutely right. The environment that we create within the church needs to be one that facilitates healing from trauma. I've got a presentation on healing generational trauma. And one of the points that's made in that presentation is that our ministries in general within the church need to be trauma informed. And that simply means that when we are ministering to our folks, we need to bear in mind that there may be people within our congregations who have suffered from trauma, so that our ministries need to be such that they minister to people in their healing. And oftentimes we don't scratch the surface. So thank you for raising that point. All right. So,
Pastor, can I just
Owen? Yeah.
I mentioned sextortion. I don't know if you've heard of the term before.
Sextortion.
Yes.
No, what is that?
So sextortion is a new thing that's just come out, and I'm kind of and it's very close to home. It's actually been happened in Dunblane where we are, and I'm reading from the BBC report on it. Teachers are being urged to warn pupils against the dangers of sextortion, a form of blackmail involving threats that imitate pictures, that intimate pictures will be shared. Sextortion involves victims sent a nude picture before being invited to send their own in return, only then to receive threats that the image will be shared publicly unless they meet the blackmailer's demands. And this is something, they said it's an unprecedented kind of guidance that's been issued, and that was only issued April.
Yeah. I remember seeing a report on that on television. And one of the things they said it exacerbates that is the development of AI.
Absolutely.
And it's so easy now with easily accessible software to create images of people, and take a picture of somebody fully clothed and turn that into something of that is a naked picture that they use to extort. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Maybe that's something that we need to add into our policy. Just
as well. I mean, as parents, they need to be careful of how our children stream online as well when they're talking to their friends. Because very often they're in the bedrooms and they might be dressed inappropriately, and they just think that they're just talking to their girlfriends, or talking to somebody who they know, when actually somebody could be exploiting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a wicked world out there, and it's a challenge for parents to keep pace with what's happening with technology and with the internet, but it's necessary. All right.
Okay.
Apologies for the images.
Sorry, Pastor Ackie. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I think my question is if sometimes the parents are aware of what they are doing to the children. Sometimes we think we are making a task easy for us, but we are damaging our children.
Yeah.
When we give the child a mobile, or we leave the child on a computer, so I can do my house chores or I can do other duties without a disturbance from the child. And I forget that I have to check on what the child is doing. I would suggest, even according to the age of the child, normally you should check a computer. There are some channels you should block on your computer.
Yeah.
For the mobile as well, if we give the child the mobile.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think it makes sense from a child of 2 years old starting making him creative with a mobile. I don't think that it does fit as a good experience for the child.
Yeah.
Another thing, as we are sure that the church have a safe environment, we have to equip the children also to safeguard themselves, to walk along, to involve the children.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. A couple of books which I'd highly recommend. One is called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I'll try and put them in the chat. Let me make myself a note. And another is called iGen by a lady called Jean Twenge. And she does, again, extensive research into the impact of social media. But somebody made the point that we are very careful to make sure that our children's physical environment are safe in terms of when they step outside of the house, where they can go, who they're with, to know where they are. But we don't do as good a job when it comes to exposing what they're exposed to online, and that can be even more dangerous. All right, moving on. Apologies for the quality of the image that you see on the screen there, but here is a children's charter that I found on the internet. And this children's charter says that we have a right to be protected and be safe from harm from others. We expect you to, number one, get to know us, speak with us, listen to us. This is absolutely key. Solomon says in Proverbs 23, train up a child in the way that he should go. And the way there is talking about the bent or the leaning of the child. In other words, what Solomon is saying, to get to know the child so that you can guide them in the direction that they should go. Well, this is a principle that we need to apply when it comes to our children. When we get to know our children, we listen to them, we develop a relationship with them, we become that safe place where they can come to us if any problems arise. 2, think about our lives as a whole. 3, think carefully about how you use information about us, respect our privacy. Absolutely, we need to be careful about how we handle information. An example of that would be, where there is a situation of domestic abuse. We need to keep information very, very, very confidential so that abusers don't get access to the people they want to abuse. 4, take us seriously, involve us, be responsible to us. 5, use your power to help make things happen when they should. So again, that's about taking responsibility. Don't leave it to somebody else to do. If you are aware of an issue, we need to raise it and put us in touch with the right people. So children need to know where they can go if they need help. All right, we're going to shift direction. Well, before we do that, just let me have a quick look at what's just put in the chat. Yep, highly sensitive and spiritual Christians should be able to sense or notice telltale signs of the impact of neglect and depravity in terms of poor attention spans, learning deficits, general poverty, indicators. Including drowsiness. Yeah, I think that was about signs of abuse. We have Scottish World Adventure Day on Sabbath coming. Craig Young from the SEC will share critical resources on e-safety with our children. Brilliant. Thank you, Pastor NJ, for highlighting that. We'll be in the Dundee Church. So excellent. Thank you for that. Any questions or observations before we move on? Because we're going to now turn our attention to looking at safeguarding adults at risk of harm. So anything on child safety before we move on? Okay, so adults at risk of harm. Adults who are over 18, this is the legal definition, who have a need for care and support, or whether the local authority is meeting those needs, is experiencing or is at risk of abuse or neglect, or are unable to protect themselves due to disability, mental infirmity, illness, or physical or mental issues. So what this graph shows, in terms of the age of alleged victims of abuse, so the vast majority of those who experience abuse are between the ages of 18 to 64. Then the number drops between 65 and 74 and begins to rise again between 75 and 84, and rises even further, 85 plus. Now, the reason why those ages, the older people get, the more abuse occurs, is obviously because they become more vulnerable. And with the 85 plus, that number is that high because that's the age where many adults at risk of harm go into care facilities. And the level of care which they receive within those facilities don't tend to be as good as they are when somebody is being taken care of by their own family members. So yeah. We have a hand raise, BDB. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. BDB. Okay, we'll move on. So perpetrators known to the victim of abuse. And again, this shows the pattern of who is actually perpetrating the abuse. And what we see here in terms of social care, again, it highlights the point we just made before, that when somebody goes into an institution, the likelihood of abuse is raised significantly. And again, it highlights the point that most abuse that is suffered by adults at risk of harm is at the hands of people that they know. So here are some of the types of issues that people may be experiencing, which can exacerbate abuse. According to the Care Act 2014 in England and Wales, it highlights some of these issues. Dementia, learning difficulties, drug and alcohol or substance abuse, mental health issues, homelessness, domestic abuse, refugee or asylum seekers, elderly or illness dependent, bereavement, grief or loss, physical sensory disabilities. And what it's useful to note about some of these factors is that they're not necessarily permanent. So somebody who is experiencing grief or loss, that may be a temporary situation in terms of the intensity of what they are going through. And when it's at its height, they may be a lot more vulnerable than they would be once they have gone through that grief process. So the challenges that adults at risk of harm have are not necessarily permanent challenges. They can be temporary. So according to the Mental Health or Mental Capacity Act, capacity has to do with an individual's ability to make a particular decision. So an adult may not be able to make a decision due to illness, disability, poor mental health, dementia, a learning difficulty, or because of anything that may impair their judgment. And again, that's a judgment call that needs to be made, because these situations, some of these situations can be temporary. Somebody who is suffering from dementia, for example, may have times when they are perfectly lucid and they can have a rational, clear, coherent conversation. But then there are other times when they may not. You know, there are some folks, for example, who suffer from what's called Lewy body dementia, who may be fine in the daytime and then come around evening time, call it sundowning, that they may lose that capacity. So capacity is something that is flexible. It can change from time to time, and a judgment call needs to be made as to whether or not an individual has capacity. So in order to do that, there needs to be a mental capacity assessment. So a person without capacity cannot do one or more of the following. Understand the information that is given to them. Retain the information long enough to be able to make a decision. So they might understand it, but might not be able to retain it to make a competent decision. They're not able to weigh up the information available in order to make a decision, and may not be able to communicate their decision, either through their words or through signing or through blinking or some way to indicate what their will is in a given situation. So the Mental Capacity Act covers all types of decisions, but the more serious the decision, the more important it is that the guidance is followed, especially in situations such as life-saving or medical treatment. So, number one, there should be a presumption of capacity. And this is important. Don't assume that simply because of somebody's age or simply because of somebody's disability that they don't have capacity. I remember watching a video, and it was from, interestingly enough, it's from the late 70s, where there was a guy who was severely mentally incapacitated. Yeah, I think he was autistic. He was autistic, and he did not have the capacity to speak. And people just assumed that he couldn't. He didn't have a high level of IQ or intelligence. But then, as technology increased, he was able to gain access to a device that allowed him to communicate his thoughts. And when he got access to that device, he was able to make very complicated, very highly intelligent comments about what was going on in his life, what his desires were. But because he didn't have the ability to speak, it was assumed that he didn't have capacity, when that was very much not the case. So when we're dealing with people in general, assume that they have capacity until we have evidence to suggest that they don't. So don't make that assumption that they don't. So start by thinking that I can make a decision. Number two, give support to the individual so that they can make the choices that they need to make. So do all you can to help me make the decision. Unwise decisions. You must not say that I lack capacity just because my decision is unwise. So an example of this would be somebody who is in a domestic abuse situation. Now, common sense tells us that if somebody is experiencing abuse, violent abuse, that they should remove themselves from that situation. Why would you stay with somebody who is causing you physical harm? What the research shows is that somebody suffering from domestic abuse, on average, will leave their abuser 7 times and go back before they stay away for good. Now, the principle when it comes to supporting people who are experiencing domestic abuse is that if they choose to leave, we help them to leave safely. But if they choose to stay, we help them to stay as safe as possible. We cannot impose our decision on them. If they are grown adults, then we have to respect the decisions that they make. So if they choose to go back into an abusive situation, we cannot force our will on them unless they are in immediate danger of serious harm. So it is a judgment call that we make. One of the conversations that we've had in the past is, does an individual who is suffering from domestic abuse constitute an adult at risk of harm? Especially when you take into account the point I made earlier, that somebody who is suffering from domestic abuse usually has gone through a period of emotional abuse that destroys their sense of personhood, so that they may not feel that they have the energy or the ability to be able to free themselves from their abuser. For me, that individual would constitute an adult at risk of harm, but it's not clear cut as far as the law is concerned. So we need to allow people the freedom to make choices that we don't necessarily agree with, if they have capacity. The next point is best interest. So use a best interest checklist for me if I can't make a decision. And if this is not something that you are comfortable doing yourself, then speak to your designated safeguarding lead, signpost to where people can get the help they need in order to make the decisions they need to make. And number 5, the least restrictive option. So again, when we're dealing with people with limited mental capacity, we want to choose the option that allows them as much autonomy as we can. So choose the least restrictive option. Check the decision made does not stop my freedom more than needed. So we don't go too far in helping people, so that we remove the freedom that they do have. So 6 principles. Number 1, empowerment. So people being supported and encouraged to make their own decisions and give informed consent. Another factor we need to take into consideration is prevention. So it is better to take action before harm occurs. Proportionality, that's the least intrusive response appropriate to the risk that is presented. Protection, support the representation for those in greatest need. Partnership, so provide local solutions through services working with their communities. And again, it reiterates the point that we made earlier, that we as a church need to be open to working with organizations who have the knowledge and the resources that we don't. And then accountability and transparency in practice. So everything that we do, make sure that it is well documented, it is out in the open, and doesn't leave us vulnerable to accusations of malpractice. So, in dealing with adults at risk of harm, we need to utilize a person-led approach, which aims to focus on what they want to happen and stay safe in how they would like this to be achieved. So again, it's about respecting who people are and empowering them to be as autonomous as possible. So categories of abuse in adults: physical, psychological, financial, domestic, sexual, organizational, similar to those with children. Trafficking, honor-based violence, genital mutilation, all of these are different aspects which are expanded on in our policy and procedures. Financial abuse was highlighted earlier, and indications of financial abuse might be, you go to visit somebody and there's a lack of heating, clothing, or food. Bills are unpaid, shortage of money, withdrawals from their bank accounts, misplacement of financial documents, new bank cards being used, sudden will changes. That's a big issue. Sometimes when people are taken advantage of to change their wills, we've seen that not a few times within the church when we're dealing with some of our senior members. So again, this requires us to have our antenna up, especially with some of our members who are shut-ins, who are not able to get out to church. They can be very isolated and make it easier for people to take advantage of them. So as churches, we need to have a healthy process where folks are regularly visited, and when we do visit our members in their homes, just to be aware of what's going on in their environment, ask significant questions. Another area where we need to be aware of is carers, caring for carers. We have a significant number of people who are providing care for elderly members, especially, and for family members who have severe disabilities, for example, and they very much operate under the radar. Oftentimes they don't make a lot of noise. They just do what they do because they have to do it, and they can experience a lot of stress. People who are long-term carers are more susceptible to serious illnesses themselves than those in the general population. They can be more susceptible to mental health issues, physical injuries, sometimes because of the loads that they have to carry. And so we need to be aware of the needs of those who are caring for loved ones. They themselves can be exposed to harm. So circumstances in which a carer, e.g. family member or friend, could be involved in a situation that may require a safeguarding response. A carer may witness or speak up about abuse or neglect. Carers may experience intentional or unintentional harm from the adult they are trying to support, or from professionals and organizations that they are in contact with. So yeah, I've seen quite a few situations where people who are caring for loved ones with dementia, who start losing inhibitions and acting out, lashing out, they can be at risk of harm. And these individuals need support. Carer may unintentionally or intentionally harm or neglect the adult they support on their own or with others. So a person who is providing care needs to be educated or trained in the way that they support their loved one, because they might inadvertently cause injuries if they don't know how to support that loved one. So this is something that we need to be aware of. In fact, I think a lot of attention needs to be given to the carers within our church, who, as I said before, a lot of times are operating under the radar. So we need to work in partnership with team members, other churches, outside organizations. This is a concept we need to hammer home, that when it comes to safeguarding, we are not alone. Never work in isolation. Always look to see where you can get the help that you need, whether through the safeguarding lead, through the pastor, through organizations like 31/8. I'll say more about them in a short while. Social services, wherever you need to go to get the help you need, then go get that help. So in terms of collaboration with other agencies like for example, Women's Aid, the police, when if a matter is disclosed and the police start to investigate, we need to cooperate fully with the police. Legal services, probation services, family and children's services, all of these different government departments and agencies can provide help that we don't have the capacity to provide. All right, so let's look at the structure of safeguarding within the British Union. So we have the British Union Conference Safeguarding Committee. Now, I, as the safeguarding lead for the Union, chair that committee, and that committee comprises the representative from the Secretariat at the BUC. It comprises the family ministries and children's ministries leaders from the conferences. It comprises the Pathfinder leaders from the conferences and any other invitees who we deem necessary to sit on that committee. At the conference mission level, the president is the overall overseer of safeguarding within the conference and in the missions. And each conference or mission should hopefully have a designated safeguarding lead. It's not always the case. And where there is no specific designated safeguarding lead, those responsibilities fall back on the president to make sure that there is oversight when it comes to safeguarding within the conference or mission. Ideally, each conference or mission should have a communications spokesperson, and they are responsible for liaising with outside organizations and with the press, for example, if issues need to be communicated from the conference to them, or the press wants to communicate with us. So hopefully there is a communication safeguarding person in place, spokesperson in place. And then there is the disclosure clerk. And the disclosure clerk is responsible for the admin side. We'll unpack this as we go through. At the local level, the local minister, again, serves as the overall overseer of safeguarding. Each church or company or group should have a designated safeguarding lead. And again, if there is no designated safeguarding lead within the church, that responsibility falls back on the minister and the elders to make sure that the policy and procedures are being followed. Responsible person and a disclosure clerk. Well, we'll unpack these. So the designated safeguarding officer leads on safeguarding matters on behalf of the church, acts as an advocate on behalf of children and adults in need of protection, deals with concerns and suspicions of abuse, keeps accurate records, ensures safeguarding policy and guidance is followed, promotes protection of children and adults at risk, organizes training for all personnel, works in partnership with statutory and other agencies. Now, first glance at that, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, or potentially can be a lot of work. And that's probably the reason why it is a challenge to find safeguarding leads in some of our churches. If possible, churches should try and organize teams so that all of these responsibilities don't fall on the shoulders of one individual, but if you have a good team in place, that those responsibilities can be disseminated throughout the team. That's the point about I just made, where churches cannot appoint a designated safeguarding leader. Responsibilities rests with church leaders, because we cannot have a situation where there is nobody responsible for making sure that the policy and procedures are implemented. So, responsible persons. The head of every department in the church is a responsible person, and this should be made clear to people at nominating committee time when we ask them to take on church responsibilities, to point out to them that they are automatically become responsible people in terms of safeguarding. They are often the first point of contact for any church member with concerns. Their responsibility is to keep accurate records of disclosure communications, and this is vitally important in any disclosure, that there is a record, accurate record of that communication. Even if it's not necessarily a disclosure of abuse, if it's just a report or recording of a concern that is raised, a conversation, no matter how minor, make a note of that concern and keep that as a record. And we'll mention more about how to record keeping in a short while. So they are to ensure that their team completes all disclosure checks required. They support their team in fulfilling their roles and safeguarding responsibilities. And they maintain a safe working practice across their department. So that's the heads of all the departments. The disclosure clerk is responsible for the admin tasks related to safeguarding. Their responsibility is to organize disclosure and barring, should be, what is it in Scotland? PVG, is that it?
PVG, that's right, yes.
PVG, yeah. To organize those checks, issue role descriptions relating to safeguarding, and they can be found in our policy and procedures. Maintain an up-to-date list of all those working with children and adults at risk. Receive training from the conference or union secretariat, and return periodic reports to the conference on the disclosure clerks and adults at and disclosure checks and adult and child protection training that is undertaken. Okay, so can't stress this one enough. Those who are unwilling to comply with safeguarding procedures must not be allowed to hold church office. Full stop. Just don't. should not work with, must not work with children. And I know there are situations where people might be reluctant to engage in or have government checks on them for whatever reason. Sometimes it's say lack of clarity in immigration status, when you put it like that. Whatever the reason may be, if people are not willing to have those police checks done, and they're not willing to abide by the policy and procedures, they don't serve. Whatever. Okay, so how do we keep the church family safe? Choose the right people. And here we need to be very, very careful, because one of the reasons is because, as I mentioned before, it can be a real challenge to find people who are willing to serve. And we've seen several instances, for example, with pathfinders or working with young people, where somebody has come along and they're brilliant. They're very good with young people, and very quickly they are thrown into a position of responsibility with looking after young people without the church giving sufficient time to assess who these people are, where they're coming from. Because it's difficult to find people. So we need to choose the right people, and there is guidance in policy and procedures of the steps that we should take to make sure that the people we put in place are people that we can trust. Okay, we're going to have a hand up. That Sifo?
Yeah, quick question. You
Yes.
said we need to have everyone checked for the PVG. This is just a general question. What about some churches that have got students? Maybe they are talented in some various departments, but they are here on a short term. Do they still need to fill those PVGs?
Yes, they do. Hold your question. We're going to come back to that in a short while. But there is specific guidance in our policy and procedures as to exactly who needs to be police checked. The government give a specific amount of time that the individual spends working with children that will necessitate whether or not they have those checks done. So hold your question, and if it's not answered when I get to that section, then raise it again.
Okay.
So how do we keep the church family safe? Manage staff, church members, volunteers. So not just put people in place, but make sure that people get the support that they require. Create safe environment and choose good, or create safe environments and follow good working practice. We need to make sure that our members and our officers know how to respond to concerns. And again, we'll be going through that very shortly. But this is where the rubber meets the road. So if you are aware, somebody makes a disclosure, we got to know what to do. And if we don't, then ask somebody. So know how to care for those affected by abuse, the victim and the offender. And this is a difficult one. This is a challenge, because obviously we want to provide as much support that we can for those who have experienced abuse. But we also have a pastoral responsibility to the offender or the accused. The problem with that is that the same people can't support both parties. So what we advise in these kinds of situations is that the person who is accused of offending gets their support in a different context, right? with a different pastor. They get spiritual support somewhere else. because one pastor cannot support both the offender and the victim, and there is a conflict there. Provide regular training. And training, I think that the recommendation is every 2 years, training needs to be updated. But that may, because of changes with policy, training may be ongoing, but at least every 2 years. Know how to implement the policy at the local level. So the role we each play, all staff and volunteers need to be fully compliant with the child protection policy, attend appropriate training, and inform the designated safeguarding person of any concerns. And so again, here with the responsible persons, this is what they need to be aware of, whether all the people who are within their remit, their area of responsibility, have done the appropriate training and access to appropriate information. Confidentiality and information sharing. The general principle is that, well, we need to hold private that which is personal, share in order to bring safety where harm or risk of harm is present. When it comes to safeguarding matters, information should only be shared on a need-to-know basis. And again, here, this requires making a judgment call. Because the issue of confidentiality, if there is an accusation of abuse, we need to weigh the potential dangers with the confidence of the person who is accused, because just because a person is accused doesn't necessarily mean that they are guilty. So there needs to be a conversation with the designated safeguarding lead, with the pastor, maybe even consult with outside agencies to know what is the best way to proceed in order to stay on the right side of confidentiality and information sharing. All right, so we mentioned the PVG. So who requires a PVG check? Any individual working or intending to work with children and or adults at risk must have a criminal records check. And the general guidance is this. Does the role mean that the relevant individual, either supervised, unsupervised, and this is coming from the government website, does the role mean that the relevant individual, either supervised, unsupervised, on a frequent or infrequent basis, teaches, trains, instructs, cares for, or supervises children, or provides advice, guidance on physical, emotional, or educational well-being to children? So that is the general guidance as to who needs to be criminal records checked. The information in the policy and procedures is more specific in terms of the amount of time that is spent performing these roles. So that's something that you will need to consult in the policy and procedures. But yeah. So safeguarding is team ministry. If you see something, say something. I remember I was doing some studies, my doctoral studies in Andrews University, and we flew into Chicago O'Hare, and they had these posters up on the wall. If you see something, say something. And that was in regard to terrorism. But the same principle operates within the church when it comes to safeguarding and child protection. If you see something, say something. Combating abuse is everybody's responsibility. It can't simply be left to those who are in leadership. Every single person within the church has a responsibility when it comes to safeguarding. All right, let me. Okay, another short video.
Let's go all the way down. Keep the ball moving.
Something's happening.
Something's happening.
Something bad.
Something bad. I'm too afraid to say anything.
Too afraid to say anything.
I know I've got to be brave.
I know I've got to be brave.
It's hard.
It's hard. Talk to me.
Talk to me.
Hi.
Hi.
Help us break the silence. Donate at nspcc.org.uk.
Okay, so anything strike you from that? What did that communicate that we need to take into account in our churches?
I think we need to be emotionally intelligent in looking out for those non-verbal cues, which can say so much about what children are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need to have our antenna up, and I like that. Emotional intelligence is one of my pet topics. So yeah, we need to be cued into what's going on with children. Anything else that kind of strikes you about it?
Another thing that really strikes me is the fact that, you know, these things are really noticeable, and you can see it just needs for us to be brave to ask those uncomfortable questions, because in that film, the child is thinking the same thing. The trainer is thinking the same thing. And I think it just needs for us to just break that silence and ask questions, because it's only when you ask when you can actually be able to get answers. And I feel this is not only for young children, it is also for our youth in the church. A lot of our youth in the church are really struggling. And if you see even a sign that someone is distressed, they're not well, they're crying, they're just not acting out of the normal. It's important for us to actually ask those, you know, uncomfortable questions. Are you okay? Talk to me, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that. I'll come to you, Sandra, in just a second, but just to bounce off what was just shared. I remember watching a video that was related to the adverse childhood experiences research. And it made the point that when it comes to supporting people who have gone through trauma, one of the most effective things that we can do is ask. Just ask, you know, because a lot of the times somebody who is experiencing abuse wants to tell somebody. They really want to get it out into the open so that they can get the help that they need. And sometimes all it needs is somebody to ask, you know, how you doing? And they may, you know, be reluctant, but if we demonstrate that we are a safe person and we ask, you know, really, how you doing? How are things at home? Whether it could be an adult who is experiencing domestic abuse, or whether it's a child, we can sensitively just ask the question and give them the opportunity to say something. But it requires, and that's what I got from that, sometimes people in positions of responsibility can also be fearful about the fallout from just raising this. But at the end of the day, it's better to be wrong than to be silent and abuse takes place. So thank you for pointing that out. Sandra.
I was going to say also what I've noticed from that is that the adults seem to be keeping whatever the child was going through to herself, which also is not right. She should really be sharing it with maybe someone that's higher up. So we shouldn't be, as leaders, keeping things to ourselves and thinking, oh, I'm scared of sharing what's same. So we should go to someone that's of higher than us as well to speak to them. Don't discuss with your friend or anyone, because it's supposed to be also it's supposed to be confidential. But at the same time, don't keep it to yourself. Go to someone of higher authority that you can discuss the matter with and say, look, I've seen something happening to this child. So,
yeah.
If, you know,
thank you very much. Sorry if you can put our mute. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Sandra, for making that point. So important, and we cannot stress it enough. Don't go it alone. Always take it somewhere else, and we'll make the point later on about confidentiality, what we can promise to people who disclose and what we should not promise to people who disclose. But yes, we should always take it somewhere else, even if it is just about having a conversation. Yeah. Owen.
Yeah, I think the emotional intelligence point is being made already, but sometimes I find that it's people might want to ask to speak to you when you actually sit down with them. You realize the question they're asking is it doesn't match, the question they're asking doesn't match their body language, and it kind of, maybe they want to talk about something more. So I see it as an opportunity maybe to ask them to, should we go over and sit further away? So because when there's people around, they don't want to talk, right? So so we have to be very sensitive to, is this the real question the person wants to ask me, or is there something deeper going on here? And so it's a matter of reading the room, reading the person, and giving them the opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. We will touch on what the point you just made about you know, finding somewhere a safer place to have that conversation. But yeah, excellent. Thank you for
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, I think just to add, I think as much as we've been talking much more on a one-to-one basis, where we recognize cases of potential or existing abuse, I think we also have responsibility as church leaders to have more awareness programs, so that, you know, if someone is affected, sometimes in a group environment, it actually raises that level of awareness, makes it easier for the person to come forward. So I think, you know, if we were thinking more practically as church leaders, how we can have more programs that will invite these conversations so that they become easier to identify.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Beverly, for that. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the suggestions that we are making is that when we have our church boards, in the same way that on every church board, finance is one of the areas that we will automatically deal with on our church boards, that we should have safeguarding as an automatic item on our agenda, even if there are not many things to discuss, but just so that we have it there as an awareness, so that we can be having these conversations, and from those conversations can springboard the suggestion you've just made, that we make sure that we are intentional about creating the forums, the programs, the environments in which we can make conversations about safeguarding normal, so that it's just something that we do. And the more we raise that awareness, the safer environment that we can create, and the more willing people will be to come forward. I remember when I did a day dealing with domestic abuse. And after I presented on domestic abuse in the afternoon program, afterwards it was like surgery. People would because I waited around for a good while, and people would come and have a quiet conversation about what was going on. And it was just the fact that the issue had been raised. It gave permission for people to have that conversation about what was going on for them. So you're absolutely right. We need to have more conversations, more programs that will make conversations about safeguarding just the norm. Yeah. Okay, so if we can mute, please, again, if we are not making a point. All right, so reasonable grounds for reporting. Yeah, so a child tells you that they have been or are at risk of being abused. Obviously, you report that. And when it comes to disclosures with children or adults at risk of harm, there is no kind of leeway on our part. Once the disclosure is made, we are legally obligated to report. So somebody else tells you that they know of a child who has been or is at risk of being abused. You have concerns that a child may have been or is at risk of being abused based on appearance or behavior. And again, all the while, we have that conversation with the safeguarding lead, with the pastor, so that we are not operating in isolation. So how do we respond to concerns? Now, let me say at this point, I'm looking at the time. The time is now 1:10. We can press on, and I think we can finish. We'll be finished in about 20 minutes, half an hour at the most. So I'm suggesting that rather than taking another break, we just press on, because it won't take too long for us to complete. So just bear with us, and we will finish earlier than the 2:30 we were looking at, and you'll have the rest of your afternoon free. So we're just going to press on. So how to respond to concerns. Share your concerns immediately with your designated safeguarding lead or responsible person. So don't sit on it. If you're in doubt, just speak to your designated safeguarding lead anyway, because that period where we delay, a lot of harm can be caused during that time. Always remember that the welfare of the child or adult is the paramount concern. Adults may need support to take actions to protect themselves. And again, there I'm thinking in terms of domestic abuse. People may not feel empowered to be able to make the decisions that they need to. We can be on hand to provide them with information, with advice, with options as to what they can do to simply support them. We can even go along with them to make the reports that they need to make. Avoid decisions about the vulnerable without necessary information to do so. So don't go off half-cocked. While it is important for us to act quickly where disclosures have been made, still consult. Have that conversation with the designated safeguarding lead. If you are the DSL, have the conversation with the pastor. Even give a call to an organization like 318 who provide over the phone, give excellent advice. So make sure that you have the necessary information you need in order to make a disclosure. And in concerns of immediate danger, and this is probably an obvious point to make, but if there's immediate danger, report it directly to the police. It's one of those situations where we override the will of the individual. If they're in serious physical danger, then you don't mess about with that. You call the police. So, responding to concerns, be guided by your designated safeguarding lead if you feel able to speak with the person disclosing abuse. So, we may not feel that we are the right person. And obviously, these kinds of conversations are uncomfortable by their very nature. But don't underestimate yourself when it comes to having these conversations. The fact that somebody discloses to you is an indication that they see you as a safe person. And your role in having that conversation is not to be any kind of expert. It's simply to be that safe place where people can share. And once they share that information, then you can take it where it needs to go. But don't underestimate your ability to be the person who has that conversation with the person who is disclosing. If you are that person, proceed at the individual's pace. So don't rush the conversation. You know what the point that Owen made earlier. If somebody begins to raise an issue with you, take that conversation somewhere. Because if they feel that you are rushing them through a conversation, they may not feel that you're really engaged with them, or that you're properly concerned with what they're sharing with you. So make sure that you are able to have that conversation and allow the individual to speak at their own pace. Listen and accept what the person is telling you. Now, that means that you don't make judgments about what they are telling you. Just simply take it at face value, what they're telling you. And while they are telling you, don't add in your own thoughts and your own judgments about about the person who is the alleged perpetrator, and what you think about them or what you think should happen to them. That's not your role. Simply listen and accept what the person is telling you, and ask open questions that require more than a simple yes and no. Because all you are doing here, you're gathering information. What you are not doing, and I'll reiterate the point again in a short while, you're not investigating the matter. You're simply asking questions to gather as much information as the person needs to share with you, that will allow you then to assess what your next step will be. Reflect back what you hear or observe, and this does two things. It shows that you are paying attention, and it helps you to make sure that you have understood what has been shared. Similarly, summarize what the person has told you. And what that does, again, it helps them to know that you are listening to what they are saying, but also gives them the opportunity to clarify things that you might not have understood. And then clarify what will happen next. Because when people disclose abuse, they're often doing so from a position of fear. They're frightened. They're frightened about what's going to happen once they make that disclosure. So it's important for you to be clear with them about what's going to happen now that they have shared this with you. Who you are going to talk to, the steps that are going to be taken, safety measures that are going to be put in place, what kind of support is going to be available to them now that they have made this disclosure. Very important that they know what is going to happen next. So remember, you're not conducting an investigation. Do not push for information. What you don't want to do is to cause the individual to relive the trauma that they have gone through. So don't be asking them detailed information about the nature of the abuse, because that again, can re-traumatize them. Reassure the child or the adult at risk of harm that they were right to tell you and that you take what they have said seriously. So they need constant affirmation. Affirm the courage that they have taken to say what they have said, the disclosure that they have made. Explain what you're going to do next, what is going to happen, and then record all you have heard and done. So, and we have made this easier to do from the previous policy and procedures. We've expanded the reporting form to make it easier. We've given you prompts in there to know what to ask to make that easier. Now, when you are having that conversation with the person who is disclosing, by all means take notes, because you want to be as accurate as possible. But what you don't want to do is act like you're taking dictation. You want to give them as much eye contact as possible, so that they know that you are engaged with them. And then as soon as possible, after you have had that conversation, make your notes. And then once you've had that conversation, contact the relevant authority. And that may simply be communicating with your designated safeguarding lead, who will then take that further. Careful notes must be kept, recording factual information and direct quotes where possible. Notes should be signed and dated and kept securely. So the designated safeguarding lead will know where to keep those notes in a safe place. Because those notes may become subject to any inquiries that the police make later on. We all, our memories may not be great, but the saying goes, the shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. So make sure you make comprehensive notes of the conversation that you have made, sign them, date them, and make sure they're kept in a safe place. All incidences regarding the safeguarding of children and adults at risk of harm should be recorded, no matter how minor they may be considered. Even if that's just a conversation of, well, so-and-so had a bruise and yeah, it made me wonder what's going on there. If even somebody has that conversation with you, record that and keep that as a matter of record. So how to respond to concerns of abuse. In the policy and procedures, there is a flow chart, and that it'd be a good idea for designated leads, responsible persons, in fact, anybody to keep that close at hand, so that they've got an easy, simple reference as to what to do in a case of disclosure. So if there is an immediate risk, contact emergency services, as we said before. Do not delay. Discuss any concerns with the responsible person, designated safeguarding lead, or the pastor. A rapid preliminary evaluation will be made and clarification is undertaken. And again, record that concern. If there is a major concern, safeguarding lead or the pastor makes a referral to the statutory services, follows up in writing within 48 hours. The statutory services will acknowledge referral and must decide on action to be taken within 1 working day. So when it comes to disclosures, anybody can make a disclosure to social services. But social services, when it comes to dealing with organizations, they prefer for those referrals to be made by somebody who is appointed to do so. So the designated safeguarding lead. There are circumstances, and this is addressed within the policy and procedures, as to why you might go the direct route. The designated safeguarding lead may not be the safe person that they're supposed to be. The pastor may be the one against whom accusations are made. And if that's the case, then an individual might not feel safe to go through those channels to make a report to social services. But in general, let the designated safeguarding lead make contact with social services. And then that follow-up is important. So social services, they need to make a decision within a specific time frame, within one working day. But it's important for the church to make sure that they are aware of the progress that a disclosure is following. So, yeah. Follow the advice given and record all that is said and done. Statutory services will make further inquiries and may undertake a formal investigation, determining no further involvement required at this stage, or offer alternative services. So it is important when a disclosure is made that along with making a report to social services, that relevant support is identified and offered. So somebody who has been the victim of abuse and might need counseling support. Somebody who is a victim of domestic abuse who may have had to leave home, they might need support from the council for accommodation. So assess the situation, identify appropriate sources of support that the individual might need. Once that conversation, the initial conversation, the preliminary evaluation is made, if it is decided at that point that there is no concern, continue to be alert to the welfare of the adult or child, or keep the situation under review. So you will have that record in place. But yeah, if it's deemed that there is no concern, still just be aware of that conversation for the future. All right, so the 4 R's when it comes to safeguarding: recognize what abuse is and that you need to act to protect. So again, read the policy and procedures. If you are in a position of responsibility, just take the time to go through it. It is a significant document, and because of the updates that we have made, it has increased substantially in its size. But if you are a person who is in a position of responsibility when it comes to safeguarding, take the time to go through that document. Secondly, respond and give the time to listen to the individual's concern. 3, report past the concern to your designated safeguarding lead or pastor, and record, make a note of all that was said and done. There's an old picture of the BUC website. It's changed a little now. By the way, keeping our church family safe is no longer the title of our policy and procedures. We had an extensive review done by the organization 318, and one of the recommendations that they made was in regards to what we call our policy and procedures. So that is no longer the title of our safeguarding, it's simply safeguarding our church. And yeah, if you go to our website, you can access not only the policy and procedures, but there is other information there that can support you in your safeguarding responsibilities. That's both for our safeguarding children and adults at risk of harm. And also we've updated our domestic abuse policy. So that was voted through on the last executive in March. The BUC executive, it wasn't the last executive, but the BUC executive in March, that was voted through. So that is also on the website. You can download our domestic abuse policy and procedures. In regard to policy and procedures, one of the tasks that we have been given is to create a separate policy and procedures for each entity. So we will create a document that is specifically for England, England and Wales, one for Scotland, one for Northern Ireland, and one for the Republic of Ireland, so that it just makes it easier for each entity to utilize that document. For example, if you need to send our policy and procedures to local authorities, as has been the case, it just makes it easier if we have one that is specific to the Scottish mission and each of the entities. So we're working on that. We are also in an advanced stage of separating the adults at risk of harm section of the policy into a separate document. So we will have one specifically for children and one specifically for adults at risk of harm. That's gone through its first draft. We need to take it through our committee and then send it on to the British Union to vote through. So there are changes that are afoot. So watch this space, and we will make that available to you. In terms of posters, within the policy and procedures, that we have created a couple of posters which churches can put up in their facilities. One is a summary of our safeguarding policy, and the other is a list or a stencil where you can add contact numbers. So it's each church, each facility should have those two posters up so that people, number one, are aware that we operate a safeguarding policy and procedures, and two, to know who to contact in cases of emergencies. Here is the organization 318 that I mentioned. They are an absolute godsend. They used to be called the Church's Child Protection Advisory Service. They changed their name to 318, and that's reflective of the passage of scripture that we looked at before, Proverbs 31:8. Now, they are brilliant. You know, if you have any doubts about any issues concerning safeguarding, child protection, check them out. Give them a call. They have a helpline. If you call their helpline, they will take your details, and they will give you an email summary of the conversation that you've had and the advice that they have given to you, and they are available for follow-up. Whenever I have any issues to do with safeguarding, they are an excellent safety net, and the fact that they are a Christian organization is all the better. So yeah, keep their number close by. And we'll round up with that passage, Proverbs 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Let me open the floor up for any questions or observations that you might have. I see a couple of hands. Patricia.
Hello.
Hey.
Yes, I wanted just to say thank you for this wonderful presentation and the initiative of BUC to have this very necessary and important subject to be discussed. Was really a lot of information. especially for who comes from other countries, and the procedure can be a little bit different. So it is really good to clarify in our church to have different people from different cultures and backgrounds. So it is really necessary. I just wanted to highlight one of the points that you mentioned about that is really important that to have these conversations with our children, and in order especially to prepare them to understand this kind of, let's say, signals or information. Unfortunately, in our families, especially in old generations, talking about sex is kind of is still in some families of a taboo to talk about different kind of how the children can relate to understand different kind of sexual education. But there are points that's very different between sexual education and sexuality. Sexuality is something broad. And we as a parents, and I'm very concerned because I'm a mom of 3, and I used to study this kind of subjects. And one thing that for me is very important that we as parents, if you can, prepare our children and help them to understand and acknowledge how they can protect themselves. And one of the way is help them to be educated, and it can be done since they were born. Since from birth, you can help them to understand what's look after for the body, what is to understand what's private parts, what is this intimate relationship, what is a good conversation, what's a bad conversation, how they can relate it with other adults. And it's something that starts from home. So it's a kind more about like a preventive situation that we face, and this statistics shows how they can really be abused inside home. And in my practice around different schools, it shows that they don't know and they confuse the language when the adults relate to them, and the children, they don't understand what kind of language, because the abusers, they really are friendly, they give things, they try to get the family, and it's really hard to understand. And many children, they're gonna be confused because they don't understand this language. So when many times you bring to the children the sexual education, and they can understand all these subjects, it's gonna be easy for them to express themselves. And there are ways to do it through, for example, games, through plays, because many times opening conversation not gonna make them to express direct. They can feel intimidated or afraid for many reasons. So we discover in different situations how, especially the youngest ones, said how they are being abused through play games, through the situations that when we are playing with them. So there are techniques and tools that you can use, so you can really find out if the children are being abused at home or different places, and not always through verbal. They cannot express this many times. So I'd like to highlight this as well, especially as well when you treat our children and they think many things that to talk to them is something that's normalized, right? When you shout to them or you talk in different kind of way, like a sexual way to talk, they can understand this as normal. So if they go out and people shout to them or do things similar, it is for them not gonna be considered abuse, because they have this at home. They are used to behave in this way or to listen to this kind of things. So it's very important to us as a parents as well to understand this culture's difference, norms, procedures as you brought to us, and be able to help our children to be prepared and to educate them, so you can prevent and not go through all these procedures that you can always have to know. So thank you so much for the talk.
Oh, thank you for the feedback. There is so much excellent ideas and information that you have shared there, and you've highlighted the importance of parents taking responsibility, because if we can create that environment where conversations about sex and sexuality are normal, we don't allow our children to be exposed only to one side of the conversation. Because if we don't talk about it, trust that children will be exposed. They are already exposed to these matters through the school curriculum, through what they're seeing on the internet, through what they're seeing on television. And we need to be the counterbalance to put sex and sexuality in its proper context, in its proper biblical context. But that requires us to be comfortable having the conversations, and that may need us to stretch beyond our level of comfort, so that we can create that safe space to have those conversations. So yeah, thank you so much for the points that you've just shared there. One of the things that what we will do, I think the point has already been made that this training will be placed on the Scottish Mission website. Along with that, I will place some resources that may be helpful, some reading material that may be good for you to read, that will help to have those kind of healthy conversations with children around sex and sexuality. So I will add some resources that will go along with the video on the site, and also a PDF copy of this presentation. Pastor Massey.
Thank you very much, Pastor Les, for that excellent presentation. And I think I would probably recommend that you do this a bit more often with the membership and with the leadership. My question really is about the DBS and the PVG side of things. Now, certainly within the educational sector, anyone that has any kind of criminal record will not be allowed to go anywhere near children.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking from a church perspective, when we appoint responsible people, when we appoint leaders in various capacities, if we know that there is, or if we've been notified that there is some kind of a criminal background, what should our response be to that situation? And yet their name is either recommended for some kind of leadership, or they are already in some kind of leadership position.
Yeah, good question. That will depend on the nature of what comes through that report, the police report. Obviously, if somebody is has committed abuse, they will be under a particular order to avoid any contact with children, participation in any programs with children. But there is a time limit to some orders that are made. What we need to make sure is that somebody who does have a past where abuse has taken place, or they have been a perpetrator of abuse, that we have, and it's contained within our policy and procedures, a agreement that is signed by the individual as to what they can or can't do within the church. And we need to be proactive in making sure that we put safeguards in place, not just for children and adults at risk of harm, but also for the person themselves, so that they are not exposed to temptations that may lead them down that path again. So there needs to be, again, a conversation with interested parties within the leadership as to what is appropriate for people who have a past, how they can still be involved within the church situation. If somebody has committed abuse within a particular church, it may not be appropriate for them to go back to that church because the victim is still there. They may have to go somewhere else. But in terms of recruitment and in terms of utilizing people who have disclosures on their record, that's a judgment call that needs to be made, dependent upon what the disclosure is, how serious it is, what restrictions are placed upon them, how long those restrictions are placed there. But we need to use our best judgment to make sure that we keep children and vulnerable adults safe. Okay, Philomen? Did I pronounce that right?
Thank you. One of my questions you have already answered it is about I was about to ask for PowerPoint presentation. You have agreed to send it. Thank you very much. And I want also to ask for clarification for, you have mentioned the modern slavery.
Say again?
Modern slavery. What do you mean by that?
Modern slavery.
Yeah. Do we still encounter that?
Yeah, what the research shows is that there are more people enslaved today than were enslaved through the transatlantic slave trade. Individuals who, not just in other countries, but also in this country, who may be brought over on false pretenses, passports confiscated, and they are kept as slaves within homes, doing washing, ironing, all sorts of tasks without payment. And because their immigration status, they may have stayed longer than their visas have allowed them to, that's held over them, and so that they are kept as slave labor. So there are the various forms of modern slavery. Some sex trafficking is a form of modern slavery. So yeah, it's a real issue, and it's something we need to be aware of. But that's modern slavery.
Okay, thank you very much for a very informative presentation.
All right, thank you. Donovan?
Right. I'm just going to come a little bit back to the issue. I think that was the question that was just raised prior to this one, which concerns either a church member has been or a serving church member has disclosures that are sort of been brought to light. And maybe they might conflict maybe with the position in which they are serving. Yeah. So the first thing is, under Disclosure Scotland, the church should do what we call a risk assessment.
Yeah.
In fact, before that, the individual, technically the individual should be stopped, but it's not like how we out in the open and do something like that. I think this can be discussed with the pastoral minister on how, once the risk assessment is being carried on, then the church has to decide on a plan of action to say, how can either the risk be mitigated? It cannot be offered, and that's just what Disclosure Scotland.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And as I say, there within the policy and procedures, there is a form that we can use to do a risk assessment. So yeah, thank you for that feedback and clarification. Pastor NJ, and then I see a hand from, is it Christine?
Yeah. Oh, maybe Christine can go ahead of me.
You are a gentleman.
Thank you, NJ. It's just a brief point. I've been appointed the Keeping Church Family Safe Officer, but with the new terminology, could you clarify that that is the same as what you refer to as the designated safeguarding lead?
Yeah, keeping the church family safe was the name of the old policy and procedures, which is now simply called keeping safeguarding our church. So the designated safeguarding lead is the position that you have agreed to take on.
Okay, thank you. And just finally, you gave us the BUC safeguarding structure. Could you specifically outline the Scottish mission structure for us, please?
Yeah, it's the same. So you have the president, then you have the designated safeguarding lead, who I believe is Tarzan at the moment, who's serving that function. Then you have your disclosure clerk, and who's responsible for processing the PVG applications.
Would that be Hillevy Walker?
Yeah, I see Cedrine nodding. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
All right, no problem. Pastor NJ.
Thank you, Les. Top job, as usual. Much appreciated. Some organizations within the UK and within Europe have listed things like modern day slavery.
Yeah.
They've listed things like female gender mutilation.
Yeah.
Together with dowry. And they put these at the same level. Does the church have a statement on dowry? The cultural practice, some call it, I mean, in other forms, it's bridal price. Does the church kind of have a statement on that, seeing we were quite multicultural?
Yeah. We don't have a statement on dowry in regard to safeguarding. We have a guidance on dowry in terms of whether or not the church recognizes traditional marriages. But that's something that was put together by the SEC several years ago. But in terms of safeguarding, no, we don't have any specific guidance as far as that is concerned. Maybe that's, as you've mentioned it, as you've raised it, I'll have a look to see whether or not that's something that we need to consider putting in our procedures. But at present, no, nothing specific in regard to safeguarding. Any feedback on that? Was there something you had specifically in mind?
No, it was genuine inquiry.
Right.
I think it, as you have noted it, I think that should suffice, because it may be that we do something on it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. All right. Any other questions, observations, pearls of wisdom? Can we go now?
Just one question I have, just around data protection. Whilst someone here.
Yes.
So when someone shares information with you, how is that? How do we manage data protection around all of that? Is there a process?
Who is you?
Sorry?
When you say share, who is you? When you say somebody shares information with you?
Disclose something to me.
Right.
And I'm making notes of that, and I'm also reporting that. And how do we keep that information safe and secure?
Yeah, well, the designated safeguarding lead for your church should have a specific place that is secure, whether it's a safe or wherever. So once you've taken those notes, signed them and dated them, hand them over to your designated safeguarding lead, who will then place it in a secure place. So even if it's digital, it needs to be password protected. If it's on paper, it needs to be kept in a physically secure place.
Right. Thank you, Pastor.
I think the length of time that it can be kept is up to 10 years.
10 years. Okay. And thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Dorothy?
First of all, thank you for the presentation. Very, very good and very timely. I was just thinking on the vulnerable adults part of things with mental capacity.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that's a bit of a challenge in terms of the church on how you get that implemented. It's easier when it's an organization. So for instance, I work in healthcare, so it's easy in a healthcare setting because I do have documentation on mental capacity, on power of attorney, and things like that. But in terms of a church, it's very difficult to be able to assess who has mental capacity and if you have, if they who has power of attorney and things like that. It's very, very difficult in a church setting. So I don't know how we can implement that in a church setting.
No, it's a good point you raise. And if in doubt, then we refer to whoever has that authority. Have a conversation. But if we are not in a position where we can clarify what capacity is, then we need to refer to people who can make that clarification. So whether that's through the assistance of relatives, or whether that's going to social services to get that clarified. But you're absolutely right. This is not an easy thing. And as I say, with our adults at risk policy and procedures, this is something that it's a new area that we are kind of expanding into. So it will be a learning curve. So yeah, I take that on board. But if we are in a position where we can't clarify, then we need to refer to those who can give us that clarification. But yeah, you make a very valid point. Ellery?
When you were talking about grooming earlier, and you mentioned about often a groomer is grooming the family, the same goes for our church organization, doesn't it? That in our churches, somebody could groom the church, come across as being the ideal person for a position, and in order to have access to our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Abusers are master manipulators. It's like they go to a university to learn how to manipulate, and they will manipulate any situation, any environment, any group of people in order to be able to perpetrate their abuse. So yeah, they are by nature deceptive. So you're absolutely right. They will groom every environment. Pastor NJ?
My apologies. Just forgot to.
I accept your apology without reservation. Okay, folks, any other questions or observations before we close?
No, just a big thank you. Just a big thank you again, Pastor Les, for your presentation. So on behalf of the Scottish Mission, Family Ministries, Children's Ministries, Pathfinders, Adventurers, Youth, and obviously overall safeguarding, we appreciate your time and energy and wisdom. And for everybody here, we are going to work with our communications team to get the recording onto the Scottish Mission YouTube channel, and also a link put onto the Scottish Mission website so that you can have direct access to that for sharing it with your local churches as well.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Cedrine, for keeping us in order and for curating the session. All right, let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for allowing us this time together. And again, we're discussing very serious matters, and we pray that you will help us to take on board the guidance that you have provided for us, and to be able to create that safe environment for our children and our adults at risk. Help us to learn what we need to learn, to put in the effort, the time to familiarize ourselves with what best practice is, And we thank you, Father God. Be with us now as we go about our separate ways, and keep us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 All right, thank you.